The story begins in Gurthal, the capital city. Dilluk Ravello was stunned when he received a letter declaring that the civil official had appointed him as the Lord of Tenma. Shock quickly turned to dismay. Why had they done this to him? Seeking answers, he made his way to the palace gates only to be denied entry. The guard, though visibly tense, remained respectful as he informed Dilluk that he was simply carrying out the king's orders. Standing in disbelief, Dilluk listened as the guard explained that he had once been a trusted and valued aide to the king, and his exile was seen as a significant loss. His contributions had been well known, and his policies had greatly improved the nation's well-being. Concern was evident in the guard's eyes as he admitted he had no idea what had caused the king's sudden decision. Dilluk was equally bewildered. He couldn't fathom what had led to such a drastic shift in the king's attitude. As a member of the Ravello family, a noble house from the countryside, he had been raised with the motto, "Protect the people." For generations, his family had served as the head of the king's guard, a prestigious role known as the king's sword. His older brother had inherited the skill and talent befitting such a position, but Dilluk's fate had been different. He had awakened ancient summoning, an ability deemed strange and useless. Despite his efforts, he had been unable to activate the skill, forcing him to abandon his path as a warrior and start anew. Refusing to give up, he dedicated himself to rigorous study and eventually passed the exam to become a civil officer. His relentless work ethic caught the attention of the king, leading to his unprecedented appointment as the first civil official to ascend to the rank of royal advisor. Serving the king, the nation, and its people had brought him great pride. Yet despite all he had accomplished, he now found himself cast aside, left to question everything that had led him to this moment. As Dilluk stood in stunned silence, a young man approached with a smug expression. Akudu, exuding arrogance, taunted him, remarking that he looked utterly lost. With a smirk, he jeered that Dilluk's current predicament suited him. After all, someone with a worthless skill deserved nothing better. Without warning, Akudu seized Dilluk by the collar, his voice dripping with resentment. He accused Dilluk of being an unbearable nuisance, stealing the spotlight that rightfully belonged to him. Despite being from a powerful duke's family, Akudu had been overshadowed, and Dilluk's rise to becoming the king's advisor had only deepened his bitterness. After a moment, Akudu released his grip, his smirk returning. It seemed Goethe had been quicker than expected in banishing Dilluk, and he found the outcome amusing. Suspicion flared in Dilluk's mind. He demanded to know what Akudu meant, but as realization dawned, fury overtook him. The pieces fell into place. Akudu had been working against him from the shadows. With a smug laugh, Akudu turned away, boasting that he had simply fulfilled his duty. He took pleasure in recalling the false accusations he had spread, twisting the truth to frame Dilluk as a traitor attempting a coup. The weight of betrayal sank in as Dilluk collapsed to his knees. There was no doubt now, Akudu had orchestrated everything. Satisfied with his handiwork, Akudu sneered that even exile was too gentle a punishment. However, it seemed the king couldn't bring himself to execute his former advisor. As Dilluk wrestled with the bitter truth of his downfall, Akudu delivered his final insult, calling him a pathetic traitor who had no place in this kingdom. Before leaving, Dilluk met his gaze and left him with a final warning, to care for the nation and remember that it was not his to rule as he pleased. Akudu bristled at the remark, enraged that someone he viewed as beneath him would dare speak in such a manner. With a scowl, he slammed the palace gates shut in Dilluk's face. With a parting scoff, he spat out his last words. Dilluk and his useless skill were worth nothing. He should simply accept his fate and waste away in the land of the banished. As Dilluk sat in the carriage, staring at the passing landscape, he couldn't help but reflect on the cruel turn of events that led him to this moment. Not long ago, he had been a trusted royal advisor, serving the kingdom with dedication. Now, he was being cast away to the remote and lawless borderland of Tenma. The realization of his exile still weighed heavily on him, making it difficult to accept the situation. His thoughts were interrupted when the coachman informed him that they were nearing their destination. Tenma had long been regarded as an unruly territory where the influence of the government was barely felt. Even its previous lord had abandoned it, leaving behind a land that no one wanted. Dilluk, feeling guilty for making the coachman travel so far into isolation, expressed his apology. However, the man reassured him that it was no trouble at all. If anything, he felt embarrassed that someone of noble status had to ride in his worn-down carriage. Dilluk, unbothered by such things, was simply grateful for the man's kindness. As they emerged from the dense forest, the full extent of Tenma's bleakness was laid out before him. Well, she's a beauty, isn't she? Instead of a struggling but functional settlement, he was met with a barren, lifeless expanse. It hardly resembled a village at all. The sight left him momentarily stunned, forcing him to come to terms with the reality of his new life. The coachman hesitated before asking where he should place Dilluk's belongings. However, Dilluk barely registered the question, too focused on taking in the desolate surroundings. Eventually, he set out in search of a place to stay. Wandering through the area, he came across a small shed and decided to enter. Without hesitation, he announced himself as the newly appointed Lord of Tenma, only to be met with a shocked reaction from a young woman inside. She was clearly bewildered by his sudden arrival, questioning if he had truly come to inquire about the former Lord's residence. Following her lead, Dilluk soon arrived at what was supposed to be the Lord's manor. What he found instead was a crumbling structure, barely standing, seemingly moments away from complete collapse. It was a far cry from what he had envisioned, but at this point, nothing about Tenma surprised him anymore. Sensing her unease, the woman hesitantly apologized for the state of the building. Dilluk, though fully aware of the dire condition, brushed aside the concern. He had no choice but to accept this reality. Before leaving, the woman explained that she needed to head to the mountains before nightfall. It was almost sunset, so Dilluk asked why she was headed there so late. With regret in her eyes, the woman informed him that she didn't have a choice. The village fields yielded almost nothing, leaving her with no food to provide for her younger sister. Though she wished she could offer something to Dilluk, she had nothing to spare. Hearing this, Dilluk was taken aback. He had never imagined that such a dire situation existed within the borders of his own kingdom. Children going hungry, people struggling to survive, this was a reality he had never heard of. Without hesitation, he offered to go to the forest for the woman. Though she initially hesitated, he reassured her that this would serve as an opportunity for him to see Tenma with his own eyes. Before setting off, he instructed the coachman to unload his belongings, which the man was happy to do. That night, Dilluk ventured into the forest, a place cloaked in an unsettling atmosphere. The dense, eerie surroundings kept him on high alert. However, what made the journey truly dangerous was the presence of miasma, an impure, mana-infused air that attracted monsters. This was a significant problem for Dilluk, as his ancient summoning skill was currently useless. Although he had some swordsmanship training, his physical strength was not his greatest asset. In a situation like this, he would need to rely on his wits to survive. As he pressed forward, a distant scream pierced the silence. Unbeknownst to Dilluk, a desperate couple clutching their child was on the verge of being torn apart by a monstrous beast. In an instant, Dilluk sprang into action. With precise movements, he executed the Ravello-style technique, seamlessly combining it with the Starlight Slash. His sword struck true, cutting down the beast in a single, fluid motion. The battle was over before the couple could even process what had happened. Stunned by the display of skill, they could only stare in disbelief. A swordsman of his caliber was the last thing they expected to find in such a forsaken land. Dilluk, however, was far from satisfied with himself. He knew his abilities were nothing special, and truthfully, he had only managed to win because the creature was merely a kobold, hardly a formidable opponent. Yet before he could dwell on it further, a sense of dread washed over him. A thick droplet of saliva splattered onto the ground before him. Following its origin, he looked up, only to lock eyes with a massive serpent looming above. It was no ordinary monster. This was the Great Snake Serpent, an A-rank creature of terrifying strength. "Come on, cut my boy some slack." The couple, who had barely regained their composure, were now paralyzed with fear. Never in their lives had they encountered a snake of such monstrous size. Panic-stricken, they begged Dilluk to save them. Though he barely had time to think, he knew he had no other option. The snake launched its attack, and Dilluk fought back with all the skill he possessed. However, it quickly became apparent that this battle would not be so easily won. The beast was relentless, and its immense power forced him onto the defensive. Then, with a sudden, crushing blow from its tail, Dilluk was sent flying. Despite the impact, he barely managed to land on his feet. He had been lucky, but he knew luck alone would not save him. The serpent's scales were nearly impenetrable, and if he continued to fight recklessly, his sword would shatter before he even got the chance to land a decisive strike. As the monster prepared for another attack, Dilluk had mere seconds to formulate a strategy. Amidst the chaos, a question lingered in his mind. Why had he come to this forest in the first place? Was it out of sheer recklessness? A desire to prove Akudu wrong? No, it was more than that. He had come because he wanted to protect the people of this forsaken land. These villagers had been abandoned, left to suffer in a place devoid of hope. With newfound determination, he pushed forward, his blade cutting across the serpent's face. Though it was far from a fatal blow, it was proof that he could fight back. His technique might not be the strongest and his skills might be lacking, but none of that mattered. If nothing else, he would protect these people, no matter what it took. As the snake retaliated, Dilluk raised his sword, bracing himself for the impact. Then at that very moment, a notification flashed before his eyes. He was now able to use the ancient summoning skill. Dilluk stared at the notification in confusion, struggling to comprehend why his skill had suddenly activated. The message stated that in celebration of his ascension as a feudal lord, he could summon for 0 points. Yet, he had no idea what this so-called celebration was or why this was happening now. However, there was no time for questions. The massive snake loomed over him, poised to strike once more. Instinct took over and Dilluk activated his skill. As he swung his sword, a fierce gust of wind erupted, causing the snake to writhe in discomfort. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a white dragon with shimmering scales emerged before him. The dragon addressed him with unwavering loyalty, asking how he could serve. Dilluk was momentarily stunned. Why had this dragon appeared? And why was it calling him master? The dragon, sensing his confusion, clarified that he had been called through the ancient summoning skill. The couple behind Dilluk could only watch in stunned silence, equally bewildered by the presence of the majestic creature. With a calm yet assured tone, the dragon assured Dilluk that he no longer had anything to fear. Even so, the beast was convinced that Dilluk alone had the strength to vanquish the snake. Dilluk, however, remained skeptical. He lacked magic, so how could he possibly take down such a powerful creature? The dragon reassured him, explaining that the ancient summoning skill granted the summoner all the abilities of the being they called forth. At this moment, Dilluk was overflowing with mana. Realizing the potential of this newfound power, Dilluk asked if that meant he could breathe fire, just as the dragon could. The dragon confirmed this without hesitation. Without wasting another moment, Dilluk raised his sword, blowing some mana into it. Flames erupted along the blade's edge, its heat radiating power unlike anything he had ever wielded before. The sensation was exhilarating, which was also new to Dilluk. Just as he took in the sheer force now at his disposal, the giant snake lunged once again. But this time, Dilluk stood his ground with unwavering confidence. With a decisive swing, he executed the Ravello-style Starlight Slash, unleashing an attack so ferocious that the snake was cleaved cleanly in two. The battle was over in an instant, and Dilluk hadn't even broken a sweat. He could hardly believe what had just happened. Had he really done that? Hovering above him, the dragon regarded him with amusement, simply reaffirming what he had already said. Snapping back to the present, Dilluk quickly turned to check on the couple. They were unharmed, their expressions filled with awe and disbelief. Overcome with gratitude, they began to praise him, calling him a divine swordsman and a god descended to the mortal realm. His gaze then fell upon the infant nestled in their arms. The baby's innocent laughter made him smile, a moment of warmth amidst the chaos. Turning his attention back to the dragon, Dilluk inquired about his name. The dragon responded simply, he was known as White Dragon, a title that was both his identity and his truth. Well, they put a lot of work into brainstorming that name. Furthermore, he insisted that there was no need for honorifics, for Dilluk was his master. Even so, Dilluk hesitated. A being of such immense strength choosing to serve him felt almost weird. However, White Dragon reassured him, explaining that power was not a concern. Dilluk had already proven his worth by conquering the monstrous snake. Reflecting on the battle, Dilluk still couldn't quite process what he had just done. Had he truly breathed fire? The realization was overwhelming. His curiosity deepened and he turned to White Dragon with a question. Was he a being from the past? After all, the skill was called Ancient Summoning. White Dragon admitted he wasn't entirely certain but strongly believed that to be the case. He then encouraged Dilluk to investigate for himself. Following the suggestion, Dilluk activated the status screen. His eyes widened as he read through the information. The skill allowed him to summon and revive souls from 4,000 years ago, bringing them into the present to serve him. Moreover, he would inherit their abilities as his own. It was a revelation unlike any other. As Dilluk processed this newfound knowledge, White Dragon let out a small chuckle, realizing why he had waited for so long. When Dilluk asked why White Dragon had been waiting, the dragon explained that he had long anticipated the arrival of the one destined to wield the ancient summoning skill. And just as he had waited, so too did countless others who had once shed their mortal coils, yearning to be called forth once again. With that, White Dragon bowed deeply, declaring that he had come this far for the sole purpose of serving his master. Dilluk struggled to fully grasp the magnitude of this revelation. There was still so much he didn't understand. But one thing had become clear, this skill was far from worthless. In fact, it might just be the most powerful of them all. And with this realization, a renewed sense of purpose ignited within him. Unbeknownst to him, far beyond the reaches of the forest, a mysterious figure stirred with excitement. The one they had been waiting for, the master they were destined to serve, had finally appeared. Dilluk offered the couple a ride on White Dragon's back, an offer they hesitantly accepted despite feeling a bit embarrassed about relying on him. Even so, their gratitude outweighed their discomfort. Dilluk, however, brushed off their thanks, insisting that White Dragon deserved the recognition instead. The dragon, ever composed, dismissed the praise because it was only a simple act of duty. As they soared through the sky, the husband suddenly realized that Dilluk was their new lord, a revelation that brought his wife a sense of relief. This reaction unsettled Dilluk, who believed he had yet to prove himself worthy of such trust. The husband, however, strongly disagreed, pointing out that Dilluk had just demonstrated his strength by effortlessly cutting down a giant snake. He expressed his admiration, convinced that no other lord could be as dependable. Excited by the thought, he declared that he and his wife must spread the word of Dilluk's heroic deed to the entire village. This only made Dilluk more flustered, insisting that there was no need to do so. White Dragon, however, saw no issue with it, believing that such feats deserved to be recognized far and wide. Although Dilluk felt shy about the praise, a quiet sense of pride settled within him. He had been banished and sent to rule over the remote borderland of Tenma, a punishment that came without warning. Yet, despite the unexpected turn of fate, he had managed to awaken the ancient summoning skill, which had ultimately saved the villagers. However, he was well aware that this victory wasn't his alone. Without White Dragon, he wouldn't have stood a chance against the beast. White Dragon, however, viewed things differently. From his perspective, heroic spirits like himself were simply extensions of their summoner's power, existing only to serve those who possessed the ancient summoning skill. As the journey continued, Dilluk reflected on the nature of his newfound ability. The skill allowed him to wield the strength of any heroic spirit he summoned, a realization that filled him with both excitement and curiosity. However, upon inspecting his status screen, he noticed a restriction. He was currently unable to summon another spirit. There was one remaining summon available to him, and after that, he assumed he would need to earn points before unlocking another. Yet the method of earning these points remained a mystery. There was still much about the skill that he did not understand, but one thing was clear. The spirits he summoned came from an era dating back 4,000 years. The revelation of Dilluk's skill left the husband astonished, as history from 4,000 years ago had seemingly faded into obscurity. His wife agreed, remarking that no records from that era existed, not even within the vast libraries of the capital. She added that this period once saw the rise of a now-lost civilization. Reflecting on this, Dilluk speculated that it was known as the Age of Legends. Before long, they arrived at Tenma. White Dragon was quick to note that the settlement was in dire need of development. Just then, the couple expressed their gratitude to him, acknowledging the great help he had provided. White Dragon, however, dismissed their thanks, stating that heroic spirits existed solely to serve their summoners. Dilluk then voiced his concern about whether the villagers might fear White Dragon's presence, but the dragon reassured him that it wouldn't be an issue. Non-human spirits possessed the ability to become invisible, and once summoned for the first time, they could be called upon freely without restrictions. Since White Dragon could still hear him even in this state, Dilluk only needed to speak his name for him to reappear at his side. As a token of appreciation, the couple offered to help clean Dilluk's manor, but he refused, insisting that he would handle the repairs himself first. They then attempted to give him a large portion of meat, but he declined, instructing them to distribute it among the villagers instead. While the couple complied, White Dragon tried to convince Dilluk to accept it, mentioning that the roasted meat was a delicacy. Ultimately, the couple left him behind to explore his new home. Upon stepping inside, Dilluk was met with a space made for living. That is, if you're a cockroach. The place was in utter disarray. Dilluk questioned whether he had grown too accustomed to the comforts of the capital and worried that he was acting spoiled. Determined to adapt, he reassured himself that as long as he had a place to store food and water, he could manage. However, he immediately noticed problems. There was no proper lighting, and when he picked up a nearby lamp, it was broken. The barrels meant for water storage were riddled with holes, rendering them useless. To make matters worse, Tenma was located at the northernmost edge of the kingdom, meaning its winters would be brutally cold. Given its remote location, Dilluk doubted that basic supplies would even make it to the town from other cities. With a heavy sigh, he realized just how much he needed. At that moment, he remembered that he still had another summon available. He wondered if there was a heroic spirit skilled in construction, perhaps a carpenter or a woodworker. Bro wants a magical Bob the Builder. Though uncertain, he decided to take a chance. Without hesitation, he activated his ancient summoning skill, calling forth a hero from across millennia to appear before him. This time, he intended to get a proper look at the summoned spirit. When he had first called White Dragon, the urgency of battle had consumed his focus, leaving him with little time to observe. As the magic activated, he reminded himself once again. This so-called worthless skill had awakened, granting him the ability to summon heroic spirits from 4,000 years ago and wield their power. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted, forcing Dilluk to brace himself as he wondered what kind of abilities this new heroic spirit possessed. The intense light momentarily blinded him, but as it faded, he found himself face to face with a striking young woman with short hair. Without hesitation, she introduced herself as Cindy Keene, expressing her delight at finally meeting him. She explained that she had responded to his summon the moment she heard it and, most importantly, had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. A sense of unease settled over Dilluk as he struggled to recall Cindy's name, an action that quickly irritated her. She protested that simply calling her Cindy lacked charm, insisting that she preferred Si-chan because it sounded more affectionate. Left with no alternative, Dilluk relented and addressed her as Si. Immediately, Cindy softened, acknowledging that it was unreasonable to expect him to know her preferences right away. She admitted that she had simply gotten carried away after waiting so long to meet him. Now fully composed, she pledged her unwavering service to him, encouraging him to command her however he saw fit. "Say no more, woman." Caught off guard, Dilluk awkwardly explained that his priority was restoring his house, though he hesitated to ask a girl for help with such a task. Touched by his consideration, Cindy grasped his hands in appreciation. Reassuring him, Cindy confidently declared that her expertise lay in alchemy, a statement that left Dilluk perplexed. Sensing his confusion, she asked if he was familiar with the discipline. If not, she assured him that there was no need to worry. He only had to watch as she demonstrated her skills firsthand. Without warning, Cindy activated her magic, alchemical arrangement, unleashing a powerful surge of energy. In an instant, the once dilapidated space transformed, now spotless and perfectly arranged. Dilluk could only stare in disbelief, struggling to process what had just happened. Cindy, brimming with pride, eagerly awaited his reaction, asking if she had been of any help. However, Dilluk was too stunned to respond immediately. When he finally managed to speak, he demanded an explanation for what he had just witnessed. With a smug grin, Cindy clarified that he had just experienced alchemy firsthand. She explained that at its core, alchemy functioned on the principle of equivalent exchange. By expanding her mana, she had gathered and reorganized the surrounding wood, effortlessly restoring order to the space. Impressed, Dilluk marveled at the technique, questioning if it was some form of ancient magic. Cindy hesitated at his phrasing before realizing the truth. Alchemy had long since vanished from this era. Despite its absence, she reminded Dilluk that he shouldn't hesitate to use it, as it was part of their agreement. Dilluk absorbed her words, acknowledging the truth in them. Turning his attention to his system screen, he noticed a new development. His alchemy skill had now reached level 1. Though he had yet to grasp its full intricacies, he knew he had to put it into practice. Testing his newfound ability, he activated alchemical arrangement, causing the broken lamp to suddenly emit light. Cindy immediately clung to his arm, celebrating his success and praising him for getting it right on the first try. As he processed the sensation, he noted that using alchemy drained his mana, but the potential it offered outweighed the cost. Fueled by excitement, he pushed forward, repairing a chair and patching up the water barrels, both attempts proving successful. Meanwhile, Cindy was raising her hand enthusiastically, eager for Dilluk to let her assist him further. Dilluk, sensing Cindy's desperation, decided to test her abilities more. He mentioned that he needed a new lamp and asked if she could create one for him. Without hesitation, Cindy activated alchemical arrangement, and in an instant, a beautifully crafted flower-shaped lamp materialized before them. Dilluk was amazed by the intricate design and advanced craftsmanship. Overcome with curiosity, he instinctively grabbed Cindy's arms, marveling at her power. Cindy, however, misinterpreted the gesture, her mind briefly wandering to more nasty possibilities. Her excitement was short-lived when Dilluk, rather than confessing his feelings, simply asked if she could create more magical tools. Slightly disappointed but quickly recovering, she reminded herself that love wasn't as fast-paced as she had imagined. Someone give this woman a chastity belt. Determined to impress him, Cindy perked up and declared that she would show him what true alchemy could do. In an instant, a glass and a mini-fridge appeared out of thin air. Dilluk was dumbfounded. He had never seen such technology before. Even the lamp Cindy had created was far superior to anything in this era, brighter than any lamp currently available in towns, where the lighting was barely strong enough to read in the dark. Cindy was surprised to learn how primitive lighting had become, and explained that magic stones had been a common energy source 4,000 years ago. Glass and mini-fridges, too, were everyday items in that ancient civilization. Dilluk listened intently, realizing just how vast the technological gap was between the past and the present. If they could reclaim even a fraction of that lost knowledge, the people of Tenma could live far more comfortable and prosperous lives. The idea sparked a fire within him. Was it possible to revive the ancient civilization? He had no idea how advanced they truly were, nor what led to their downfall, but the thought of bringing their innovations back to life was exhilarating. Sensing his excitement, Cindy reminded him that he wasn't just an observer. He had the power to make it happen. She held up the lamp before him and declared that he, as the chosen one, possessed the ability to reproduce and even surpass the advancements of the past. After all, he had been summoned by the ancient summoning skill, and countless heroic spirits were still waiting to answer his call. Dilluk was taken aback. Was he truly capable of something this grand? Cindy assured him that he was. She then handed him the lamp, encouraging him that this should be a piece of cake. At that moment, everything clicked. Dilluk had arrived in Tenma as an outcast, banished with no purpose. But now, with his skill finally awakened, he had something to strive for. A mission to develop this land and usher in a new era. As he stood there, absorbing Cindy's words, one phrase stood out to him. Piece of cake. He blinked, puzzled by the expression. Cindy was shocked that he had never heard of it, prompting Dilluk to chuckle. He tried saying it himself, enjoying the unfamiliar but satisfying phrase. With renewed determination, Dilluk resolved to improve the living conditions in Tenma and restore the ancient civilization's glory. To seal the moment, he extended his hand to Cindy, proposing that they work together. Cindy smiled warmly, taking his hand in hers, and assured him that they would be together forever. Just then, Dilluk remembered they needed another bed for the house. Cindy, however, insisted that one would be enough. "Give it a break, Lolly." Unbeknownst to them, in the shadows, two thugs lurked, silently observing. Their eyes glinted with malice as they plotted their next move. The next morning, Cindy woke up early to prepare breakfast, eager to be of use to Dilluk as a token of gratitude for summoning her. Dilluk was surprised by her enthusiasm, but Cindy was determined to contribute, proudly pointing out that she had crafted all the cooking utensils herself using alchemy. However, her sense of accomplishment was quickly overshadowed by frustration when she realized they had no food in the house. Despite her remarkable abilities, she was powerless in this situation. Alchemy couldn't create food. Her plan to win Dilluk over with a delicious meal had fallen apart before it could even begin. Disappointed and on the verge of tears, she was reassured by Dilluk, who reminded her that it was the thought that counted. As he watched Cindy's efforts go to waste, Dilluk recognized that securing a stable food supply was a priority. The realization pushed him to consider the fields around the village. Perhaps they held the key to solving the problem. In the meantime, with no other options available, he settled for having servant roast as their meal for the day. Later that day, Dilluk set out to explore the fields with Cindy. As they arrived, the man whose life Dilluk had previously saved recognized him and called out in gratitude. After acknowledging the thanks, Dilluk turned his attention to the man's work. Noticing that he was tending to the fields, the man confirmed this, explaining that the forest had become too dangerous, leading to a complete ban on entry. For now, his focus was on clearing the overgrown weeds, though the sheer volume made it an overwhelming task, especially with so few workers available. As they spoke, the man's curiosity shifted to Cindy, wondering about the unfamiliar woman accompanying Dilluk. Before Dilluk could respond, Cindy eagerly introduced herself, boldly claiming to be Dilluk's future wife. However, Dilluk quickly corrected her, clarifying that she was one of the heroic spirits, much like White Dragon. Cindy further elaborated, revealing that her specialty was alchemy, a concept completely foreign to the man. Wanting to illustrate her abilities, Cindy decided to demonstrate alchemy firsthand. With a swift use of her alchemical arrangement, she conjured a sickle out of thin air in mere seconds, leaving the man stunned by the sudden appearance of the tool. Without hesitation, she handed it to him, urging him to support Dilluk in achieving his vision. As the man gripped the jewel-encrusted sickle, he marveled at how effortlessly he could cut through the thin stems, despite his weak arms. Never in his life had he encountered such an extraordinary tool. Just then, Cindy revealed an additional feature. By pressing a button, the sickle could transform into a hoe or a spade. The man was even more astounded, realizing that such a versatile tool would be an immense help to the entire village. Turning to Cindy, Dilluk couldn't help but acknowledge her brilliance. Inspired, he wondered if he could craft a similar tool himself, envisioning a way to create something beneficial for everyone in Tenma. Cindy confirmed that it was possible, though she cautioned that merging large amounts of metal required a certain technique. She explained the fundamental principle of alchemy, which was the equivalent exchange of energy. By converting his mana into magnetism, Dilluk could make it attract only specific materials, ensuring that the tool components would bond exclusively with their intended parts. To him, it was akin to assembling pieces with tiny magnets. Taking detailed notes, Dilluk quickly grasped that transforming mana into magnetism was the key. Without hesitation, he activated the alchemical arrangement, and within moments, he successfully replicated the sickle Cindy had created. Cindy, thoroughly impressed, praised his work, declaring it flawless. Just then, a sudden beeping sound caught Dilluk's attention. To his surprise, his lord points had increased to 200. He speculated that contributing to the village's development had earned him these points, possibly bringing him one step closer to summoning another hero once the meter was full. The realization excited him. Not only did it signify his growing ability to aid his people, but it also meant success because he could now use the ancient summoning skill. If things continued progressing this well, Tenma's future would undoubtedly be brighter. However, his thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a distant scream. Alarmed, he turned to the man holding the sickle, who quickly pointed in the direction of the sound. It had come from Letika's house. Letika, the girl Dilluk had first met upon arriving in Tenma, was in distress. Without hesitation, he and Cindy sprinted toward her home. Upon arrival, they were met with a tearful Letika who pleaded with Dilluk to save her younger sister, Lena. To his horror, a group of thugs had taken Lena hostage. Letika then revealed that the same bandits had already kidnapped many villagers, including their parents. Now they had come for her sister as well. Dilluk instinctively gripped his sword, prepared to strike. but the bandit holding Lena immediately issued a threat. One wrong move and he would slit the girl's throat. Trapped in a dire predicament, Dilluk hesitated. Summoning White Dragon could escalate the situation, and at this rate the bandits would undoubtedly take Lena away for good. Frustration welled up inside him as he struggled to find a way out of this standoff. Then, without warning, Cindy casually raised her hand, offering herself in exchange for Lena. Her unexpected proposal stunned everyone, Dilluk, Letica, and even the bandits. Cindy calmly explained that she wished to help the village and was willing to be taken as long as they promised not to harm anyone. With a bright smile, she insisted that this was a great deal for them. The bandit, quick to seize the advantage, immediately accepted the offer. Without hesitation, Lena was released, and Cindy walked toward her captors with deliberate ease. As soon as the bandits secured Cindy, they grinned with satisfaction, marveling at how effortlessly she had surrendered. If only all hostages were this cooperative. Cindy, however, simply smiled at Dilluk, leaving him utterly perplexed by her demeanor. Meanwhile, Letica pulled Lena into a tight embrace, overwhelmed with relief that her sister was safe. Then one of the bandits urged his partner, Aniki, to make their escape. Aniki, wearing a smug grin, boasted that their unexpected prize would allow them to live comfortably for a while. In an instant, they activated a special tool, vanishing from the scene without a trace. As the bandits disappeared, Letica turned to Dilluk, guilt-ridden. She apologized, blaming herself for Cindy's sacrifice. However, Dilluk reassured her that this wasn't her fault. Cindy was no ordinary person. She was a powerful magician who wouldn't allow herself to be captured without a purpose. He held on to that belief, certain that she had a plan. Meanwhile, the man from the fields remained in shock, unable to process what had just transpired. Dilluk's gaze fell on the scythe lying beside the man, and an idea sparked in his mind. He quickly borrowed the man's sickle, his thoughts aligning with a newfound strategy. Without hesitation, he summoned White Dragon. Elsewhere, the bandits reveled in their triumph, laughing at Cindy's current predicament. They boasted that she was their most valuable catch yet. Aniki ordered his men to search her belongings, only to be puzzled by how little she carried, just a sickle and a small bag. Meanwhile, one of the bandits eyed Cindy with suspicion, unnerved by how easily she had surrendered. Aniki sneered, questioning if she was so terrified that she had lost the ability to speak. Without waiting for a response, he directed her toward the other captives. Cindy's eyes swept over the group of villagers who had their hands tied. It was clear that they had all been taken against their will, and this cave was likely the meeting point where the bandits would negotiate their sale. Confirming her suspicions, Aniki declared that they would all be sold together. He further emphasized that the entrance was sealed tight, so no one was coming to rescue them. With a smirk, he told Cindy to accept her fate. This was the end for her. However, Cindy simply smiled and turned the tables on them. Instead, she told the bandits that they were the ones who should be accepting their fate. Her confidence unsettled them. When she casually stated that Dilluk, her master, would come for her, Aniki's smirk faltered, replaced by irritation. Enraged, he raised his hand, ready to strike her down. But before his palm could make contact, a sudden force shattered the cave's entrance, sending debris flying in all directions. As the dust settled, Dilluk stood at the entrance, having arrived just in time to save Cindy. His expression remained confident as he faced the bandits, who were taken aback by his sudden appearance. Aniki, now recognizing him as the same man from earlier, was in disbelief, while his companions struggled to understand how Dilluk had managed to track them down. Without hesitation, Dilluk revealed the sickle, explaining that Cindy had previously taught him how to manipulate his mana into magnetism. Since the bandits' tools were magnetized, he had simply used that knowledge to draw them together and locate their hideout. Cindy, upon realizing this, was astonished by his quick comprehension of the technique. The bandits, although angered, refused to back down. They believed that brute force would still be enough to overpower him, especially since Aniki possessed magic. However, before Aniki could wield his enchanted dagger, Dilluk moved with blinding speed, closing the gap between them in an instant. Executing the Ravello-style Starlight Slash, he struck Aniki, who let out a cry of pain. His companion, now trembling, could barely process what was happening before Dilluk appeared behind him and delivered a precise blow to the nape. One after another, the remaining bandits fell before Dilluk's swift and calculated attacks, rendering them powerless within moments. With the threat neutralized, Dilluk secured the bandits and immediately freed Cindy. Grateful for her strategic thinking, he acknowledged that because of her, all the bandits in the area had been apprehended. Cindy, impressed by how well he understood her intentions, attributed their success to the power of love. This girl's love language is misreading signals. Meanwhile, the other captives, overwhelmed with relief, expressed their deep gratitude, declaring that they would forever be indebted to Dilluk. Then, as Dilluk surveyed the cave, he was taken aback by the sheer number of hostages. Cindy confirmed his suspicions. These people had all been kidnapped by the bandits. Without hesitation, the two of them worked to free every last one. Once the captives were released from their restraints, Dilluk ventured deeper into the cave in search of any remaining prisoners. To his surprise, he discovered a hidden cell where several demi-humans were confined, awaiting their fate as slaves. Among them was a small dwarf, who appeared stunned by the sight of someone offering him freedom. Dilluk immediately unshackled him, assuring him that everyone would be escaping together. The dwarf, however, remained skeptical. Having endured discrimination from humans all his life, he struggled to believe that Dilluk's intentions were genuine. He suspected that their supposed rescuer planned to sell them off just as the bandits had. Yet, as Dilluk removed the last of his restraints, he offered an apology for the hardship the dwarf had endured. He then made a solemn vow that such a fate would never befall him again. As the Lord of Tenma, it was his duty to help all in need. The dwarf, now stunned, realized the true identity of his savior. Dilluk extended a hand in greeting, formally introducing himself. As Dilluk grasped the dwarf's hand in a firm shake, the dwarf expressed his astonishment at being rescued by a human. Grateful for Dilluk's help, he vowed to repay both him and the people of Tenma. Dilluk acknowledged his gratitude but questioned whether the dwarf wouldn't prefer to return home. However, the dwarf was adamant. He could not face his kin without first repaying his debt. Inspired by his determination, the other demi-humans, the Kuma Bears, also offered their assistance. However, one of them voiced his concerns, explaining that humans typically reacted with fear upon seeing them. He worried that the people of Tenma would respond the same way. Yet the villagers who had been captives alongside them dismissed this fear, arguing that they had all suffered together in the cave. They pledged to convince the rest of Tenma's people of the demi-humans' innocence. Dilluk also reassured the demi-humans that the village would accept them warmly. Though he had only recently arrived in Tenma, he was certain of the villagers' kind nature. Encouraged by his words, the demi-humans decided to accompany him to Tenma. Soon after, White Dragon transported everyone safely back to the village. Upon their arrival, White Dragon inquired about Cindy's performance, and Dilluk confirmed that she had done well. At that moment, Letica rushed toward them, overwhelmed with joy as she reunited with her long-lost parents. They embraced Letica and her younger sister Lena, apologizing for being absent for so long. Letica, overcome with emotion, expressed her gratitude to Cindy for bringing them back. Cindy, however, humbly downplayed her role, giving full credit to Dilluk. Letica then turned to Dilluk, holding his hands as she sincerely thanked him for everything he had done. In response, Dilluk smiled, expressing his happiness at seeing everyone safe and reunited. Dilluk then introduced the dwarves and Kuma Bears to the villagers, explaining that they had also been victims of the bandits. Moreover, they had come to Tenma with the intention of helping to develop the village. The villagers, caught off guard by this revelation, hesitated, uncertain about how to react. Noticing their apprehension, the demi-humans grew disheartened, having anticipated such a response. But before the tension could grow, Letica stepped forward, reminding the villagers that the demi-humans had played a role in saving her parents. One of the Kuma Bears hesitantly asked if she was afraid of them, but Letica simply opened her arms wide in reassurance, insisting that they should celebrate their shared survival together. Moved by her words, the rest of the villagers followed suit, welcoming the demi-humans and affirming that they had a place in Tenma. Touched by the warm reception, the demi-humans smiled gratefully at Dilluk and Cindy. One of the Kuma Bears then approached Dilluk, acknowledging that the villagers of Tenma were indeed as kind as he had described. Dilluk, in turn, expressed his gratitude to the demi-humans for agreeing to settle in Tenma, looking forward to working alongside them. The dwarf then joined the conversation, vowing to repay Dilluk's kindness with labor, assuring him that dwarves excelled in construction. Fired up by this declaration, some of the Kuma Bears also stepped forward, eager to contribute to the village's development. With everyone aligned toward a common goal, Dilluk thanked them all for their willingness to help. At that moment, the first step toward his vision had been set in motion. He was now one step closer to building a land where everyone could live in harmony. In the midst of a bustling marketplace, Cindy and Dilluk marveled at the substantial bounty they had just received. Dilluk noted that the officers had seemed to struggle with the issue they had resolved, while Cindy added that the authorities were visibly surprised when the two of them arrived to claim the reward. Several days had passed since they captured the kidnappers, and they had traveled to a nearby town to officially collect their bounty. The bandits had been notorious for selling people from rural areas into slavery within this town, making them a particularly dangerous group. Their capture brought relief not only to Tenma, but also to the surrounding towns that had suffered under their actions. As they wandered through the town, Dilluk commented on how lively the atmosphere was. Cindy agreed, expressing her joy at revisiting the town after 4,000 years. Curious, Dilluk asked whether it had changed much since then. Cindy admitted that it had actually been more advanced in terms of technology in the past. Dilluk found this surprising considering the town's current level of development, and wondered just how much more sophisticated it had been centuries ago. While he pondered this, Cindy was less focused on the past and more preoccupied with the present, particularly the fact that she was strolling through town alongside Dilluk. Without hesitation, she clung to his arm a little tighter, suggesting that since they had traveled all this way on White Dragon, they should treat this as a date. However, Dilluk quickly dismissed the idea, explaining that he had another objective in mind: negotiations. She saw a romantic stroll. He saw a business meeting. Opposites really do attract. Curious, Cindy asked for clarification. Dilluk then explained that Tenma lacked strong connections with the outside world, and he intended to change that. His plan involved visiting the marketplace, where Cindy would sell magic items created through alchemy. Once he mastered the craft himself, they could mass-produce these items and turn them into valuable products. He saw alchemy as a crucial skill, not only for its potential to generate wealth but also as a way to foster Tenma's growth and prosperity. Determined to make this negotiation a success, he knew this was a key step toward his vision for the village. Listening to his impassioned words, Cindy couldn't help but smile. She fully supported his ambition and reassured him that with their combined efforts, achieving this goal would be easy. As they continued through town, Dilluk and Cindy came across a building bearing a familiar flag. There was no doubt that it belonged to the Maple Marketing Association, the largest trading company in the country. Stepping inside, they were immediately met by a grumpy clerk who, upon seeing their unfamiliar faces, wasted no time in demanding their business. His tone was irritable, urging them to be brief. Without hesitation, he pressed them further, asking if they were there to make a purchase or pitch a sale. Caught off guard, Dilluk quickly responded that he was there to sell. As he had anticipated from such a prestigious trading company, this encounter was not going to be easy. The clerk, unimpressed, demanded to know what product Dilluk was offering. When Dilluk answered that it was everyday goods, the clerk scoffed, making it clear that if he was there to peddle worthless junk, he should leave at once. Refusing to be dismissed so easily, Dilluk set his items firmly on the counter, insisting that the clerk examine them first. Despite feigning confidence, he knew this was a crucial moment. The clerk, intrigued by his persistence, decided to inspect the goods. Upon closer examination, the clerk noted that the items were rather unusual. Cindy then urged him to place his hand over the magic stone embedded in the wine glass. Curious, he wondered if it contained some kind of spell. The moment he pressed the stone, water unexpectedly flowed from the base of the glass. Stunned, the clerk struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Cindy explained that the magic stone, infused with mana, condensed water particles from the air and transformed them into liquid. While the glass could only produce a cup of water per hour, it was more than sufficient for drinking purposes. She then demonstrated the lamp's capabilities, activating it with a single click. Instantly, an intense light radiated from the device, much brighter than anything the clerk had ever seen. Utterly shocked, the clerk's skepticism vanished. Without hesitation, he aggressively insisted on purchasing the items. Initially, he offered 100,000 pels for the lamp and 50,000 for the glass, but after a moment's reconsideration, he raised the price of the glass to match the lamp. Dilluk quickly calculated that 100,000 pels was equivalent to at least a month's salary for many professions, far exceeding his expectations. Pleased with the outcome, he turned to Cindy and flashed her a triumphant thumbs up. Morale of the story: never underestimate the power of a well-timed product demo. Without wasting any time, the clerk grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, stating that while it might be too early, he was prepared to proceed with a contract. He then asked for Dilluk's name, and without hesitation, Dilluk introduced himself. The moment the clerk heard Dilluk Ravello, he froze in disbelief. This wasn't just any merchant. This was the Dilluk Ravello, the well-known civil official. Realizing his mistake, the clerk immediately apologized for his earlier rudeness, explaining that he hadn't recognized the esteemed associate of the king. While he was aware that Dilluk had a good reputation among merchants, he never expected a noble to personally visit. However, Dilluk quickly reassured him, stating that the king's associate group had long since disbanded. There was no need for formalities anymore, as he was now simply the Lord of Tenma, a town on the borderlands. Seizing the moment, Dilluk made a request. He wanted the clerk to arrange for a caravan to travel to Tenma and make regular purchases from the town. The clerk hesitated, noting that Tenma was quite far from their current location. Even if it was Dilluk's request, the journey posed logistical challenges. Dilluk understood his concerns. After all, distance alone made the arrangement costly and risky. However, he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. He pointed out that Tenma had an abundance of land, which could be advantageous in the long run. More importantly, the magic items he presented would be exclusively produced there. If the clerk bought them directly from Tenma, he wouldn't have to worry about additional markups from middlemen. With that, Dilluk posed a question. Wasn't this a deal that benefited them both? My boy's out here negotiating like he's in Shark Tank. The clerk acknowledged that Dilluk had made a strong argument, but he hesitated. bringing up the rumors of frequent kidnappings in the area. However, Dilluk was prepared. He then showcased a certificate of appreciation from the local officers, confirming that he had already dealt with the bandits responsible. The clerk stared at the document in disbelief, struggling to process the fact that Dilluk had single-handedly taken care of such a major threat. After a brief moment of contemplation, the clerk let out a deep breath and finally agreed to the terms. Recognizing the potential of their arrangement, he extended his hand to Dilluk, expressing his high hopes for their partnership. Without hesitation, Dilluk shook his hand, sealing their deal with a mutual promise of a prosperous trade relationship. With their business concluded, Dilluk and Cindy mounted White Dragon's back, eager to share the details of their success. White Dragon, listening to their updates, was pleased that their journey had been worthwhile. Dilluk then reflected on their accomplishments and realized the impact of what they had just achieved. With a steady source of income now secured, he could focus on making Tenma a more comfortable and thriving town, a place truly worth calling home. Dilluk was welcomed back to Tenma by the demi-humans, who were busy with construction efforts around the town. They proudly informed him that they were finishing one structure per day, a pace that impressed him. Among them, a shy dwarf responded to Dilluk's praise, admitting that he had hurriedly built a shack as quickly as possible. However, when Dilluk caught sight of it, he was taken aback because it was far too grand for a simple shack. Embarrassed by the compliment, the dwarf bashfully explained that he owed Dilluk too much to build anything less impressive. As they spoke, one of the Kuma bears joined the conversation, explaining that the construction work was also a form of training for them. They were determined never to lose to gang members again. A nearby villager, overhearing the conversation, chimed in, remarking on how dependable the demi-humans had become. Dilluk was intrigued, so asked if the villagers were working alongside them. They confirmed it, though admitting they were physically weaker in comparison. Another villager added that people had once feared the Kuma bears, but now they were as reliable as anyone else in town. Hearing this, one of the Kuma bears grew shy, confessing that he never imagined living a life like this and expressing deep gratitude to Dilluk. However, Dilluk simply told him to acknowledge his own strength rather than give all the credit away. He then expressed his excitement for a future built together with the Kuma bears and the rest of the demi-humans. As Dilluk took in his surroundings, he realized that Tenma was gradually transforming into a thriving town. However, one major issue still remained: the ruined farmland. Determined to address it, he made his way there and found Letica hard at work tending to the fields. Noticing that she was carrying water, he asked where it was from. Letica explained that there was a natural spring at the edge of the village, and she had been fetching water from there to irrigate the crops. Dilluk was surprised. Had she been going back and forth between the spring and the field all this time? Letica confirmed it without hesitation. Cindy then wondered if the glass magic item could solve this problem, but Dilluk quickly dismissed the idea. The town's population had grown and agriculture required a large water supply. Using the glass would be inefficient. Instead, something else caught his eye: his alchemy level. Checking his status, he realized that he had reached level 3, which meant he could now handle a significantly larger amount of mana. Cindy was surprised by his progress, while Dilluk decided to test his abilities. Using alchemical arrangement, he channeled his energy into the ground, causing it to crack open. Before Letica and Cindy's astonished eyes, a stream of water emerged, flowing steadily through the field. Dilluk let out a sigh of relief because his attempt had been successful. Cindy, unfazed, simply commented that she expected nothing less from him. Letica, however, was deeply moved, explaining that the ground in this area was so hard that the villagers had already given up hope of ever having a steady water source. And yet, Dilluk had made the impossible happen, which she was very thankful for. However, Dilluk wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. He noted that the water from the spring was too weak to be sustainable in the long run. He asked Letica if they had always relied on the spring water. She confirmed it, but added that the water flow had recently begun to decrease. In the past, there had been much more water. This revelation made Dilluk pause. There hadn't been any drastic weather changes, which meant the problem wasn't external. It had to be something affecting the water source itself. That led him to a single conclusion: something was happening in the mountains. Determined to uncover the cause, he resolved to investigate. However, lurking in the shadows of the mountain, an unseen predator lay in wait, its presence unnoticed as it prepared for Dilluk's arrival. Dilluk immediately set off toward the mountains, accompanied by 3 Kuma bears. After several hours of walking, he realized that they were still far from reaching the spring. Noting his determination, the Kuma bears reminded him to stay cautious, as the area was known to be inhabited by dangerous beasts that could potentially be responsible for the disruption in the water flow. Despite the warning, Dilluk remained focused, insisting that the only way to uncover the truth was through thorough investigation. Encouraged by his resolve, the Kuma bears reaffirmed their commitment to the task. One of them, however, appeared particularly eager to locate the source of the problem and return home as quickly as possible. Sensing the unusual urgency, Dilluk observed the Kuma bear's behavior and soon learned the reason behind it. Cindy, who had remained in the village, had taunted him before their departure, threatening punishment if anything happened to Dilluk. Understanding Cindy's temperament all too well, Dilluk couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern himself. Pausing for a moment, he reached into his bag, remarking that he felt bad for leaving Cindy behind. At the same time, he needed the Kuma bears to assist in some manual work for the investigation. He then revealed the item he had retrieved, a net, which momentarily puzzled his companions. He went on to explain that it was a specialized trapping net designed for capturing boars. The net's 4 corners were weighted with magic stones, allowing it to automatically ensnare its target upon activation. If a human were to be caught, they could release the trap by touching all 4 stones at once. Impressed by the ingenuity of the device, the Kuma bears weren't surprised, as they had come to expect such cleverness from Dilluk. Meanwhile, he reflected on the net's potential benefits beyond their immediate mission. By setting up these traps, Tenma's food supply could be increased, and villagers would no longer have to venture into the dangerous mountains to hunt. With that thought in mind, the group pressed forward, continuing their climb toward the spring. As the group ventured deeper into the mountains, the atmosphere grew noticeably eerie. One of the Kuma bears observed that the weather in this area felt particularly harsh compared to the rest of the mountain. Before they could dwell on it further, he turned to Dilluk with a request. If they encountered any beasts, they wanted him to leave the fighting to them. The Kuma bears explained that their species possessed immense physical strength, far greater than that of humans, but had once fallen into the hands of bandits due to sheer misfortune. Having been saved by Dilluk, they now wished to prove their true strength in battle. Their determination was evident, and Dilluk acknowledged their resolve. However, as their lord, he refused to simply stand by while his people put themselves in danger. Instead, he vowed to fight alongside them. The Kuma bears, hearing this, enthusiastically accepted his decision. Suddenly, a deep, menacing growl echoed from the shadows. Without warning, a massive 3-headed beast, Cerberus, emerged with its eyes burning with fury. The group quickly spread out, preparing for battle. Dilluk immediately issued orders, directing one of the Kuma bears to move into the mountain's shadows. Aware of Cerberus's 3 heads and its nearly all-encompassing vision, Dilluk sought to keep the creature focused on the immediate fight, leaving an opening for a well-timed strike. Seizing the opportunity, one of the Kuma bears unleashed his full strength, lunging at Cerberus with remarkable speed. His claws slashed deep into the beast's flesh, eliciting a pained howl. Wasting no time, Dilluk commanded the next phase of the attack. Another Kuma bear hurled a massive boulder, sending it hurtling toward the monster. As the rock descended, another member of the group drove a spear into the wounded beast, forcing it further into a vulnerable position. The final blow came as the boulder crashed down, sealing Cerberus's fate. With the battle won, the group erupted in celebration. They praised Dilluk for his brilliant tactics, which had allowed them to defeat the formidable creature with ease. However, Dilluk refused to take all the credit, ensuring that the Kuma bears received equal recognition for their strength and courage. Fired up by their victory, they pressed on, more determined than ever to reach the spring and uncover the truth behind its dwindling water supply. At last, the group arrived at the mountain's spring. The sight before them was breathtaking. The water was so pristine that the bottom of the lake was clearly visible. Dilluk considered how bringing enough of this water back to the village could significantly improve their situation. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he spotted an enormous boulder nearby. Something about its placement seemed unnatural, and he quickly suspected that it was responsible for blocking the water's flow. One of the Kuma bears immediately stepped forward, confident that shattering the boulder would resolve the issue. Gripping his spear, he prepared to strike, but before the weapon could make contact, the boulder shifted. To their shock, what they had assumed was an ordinary rock was actually a rock golem lying dormant until now. As the golem rose from the ground, its colossal movement sent tremors across the terrain, causing destruction in its wake. Dilluk wasted no time issuing commands, instructing the group to start throwing rocks at the golem. At this rate, the golem might just die of secondhand embarrassment. Though their attacks appeared ineffective against the creature's formidable form, the Kuma bears remained steadfast in following his orders. Meanwhile, Dilluk readied himself for a decisive strike. Drawing his sword, he executed the Ravello-style crescent upper string slash, enhanced by dragon fire, aiming directly at a rock wedged between the golem's limbs. His precision paid off. The golem's leg was destroyed, severely limiting its mobility. However, the force of the attack caused debris to scatter, threatening to clog the lake with rock fragments. Recognizing the need for a swift resolution, Dilluk called upon White Dragon, effortlessly mounting the beast. With the situation in his grasp, he unleashed another powerful move, the Ravello-style Dust Shatter Strike, directing his blade toward the golem's core. The moment his sword pierced its stomach, the creature erupted into countless fragments, leaving behind only a black orb. the energy source that had sustained its existence. The Kuma bears erupted in celebration, astounded by how Dilluk had reduced the towering monster to mere dust. However, rather than basking in their praise, Dilluk expressed his gratitude to the entire group, including White Dragon, acknowledging their collective effort in overcoming the challenge. With the golem defeated, he was confident that the spring's waters had already begun flowing back to the village. Satisfied with the outcome, the group prepared for their journey home, eager to witness the long-awaited return of the water. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Gerthel, King Gatel summoned Akudu to the palace halls, his expression heavy with disappointment. As the young noble stood before the throne, the king's gaze burned with frustration, questioning whether Akudu understood the reason behind his summons. The weight of his failures loomed over the chamber, the king's voice carrying the sharp sting of disapproval. Akudu's tenure had been riddled with incompetence, his performance lacking the precision and discipline required of his rank. It was an insult to the kingdom that he had followed a monster into the invasion of Shinjuru's castle, a reckless and unheard-of decision. When the beast had attacked, it had been the soldiers under his predecessor, Dilluk, who had stepped up to eliminate the threat. Reports flooded the king's ears, recounting how Akudu had been nothing more than a lifeless puppet in the midst of chaos, his presence a mockery of the role he was meant to uphold. He was not even half the man Dilluk had been. Beyond his battlefield incompetence, Akudu's misconduct within the castle had become an ever-growing list of offenses, his arrogance unrestrained even by his noble birth. Despite being the eldest son of Duke Higgins, he had taken his privileges too far. The king could no longer ignore his failures. Without hesitation, he declared Akudu's suspension for an entire month, demanding that he reflect on his shortcomings. Free trial over. Akudu's out. Trembling with disbelief, Akudu struggled to accept the punishment. His pride urged him to argue, to insist on his innocence, yet the king remained unmoved. His words cut through Akudu's feeble attempts at justification, rejecting his excuses outright. The sight of him alone was enough to test the king's patience. Humiliated and powerless, Akudu had no choice but to retreat from the palace, his departure marked by shame. He fled through the grand corridors, desperate to escape the judging eyes of those who might witness his disgrace. As Akudu stormed out of the palace, bitter memories resurfaced, each one stoking the fire of his resentment. Time and time again, he had been forced to hear the same infuriating comparisons. How Dilluk would have completed tasks faster, how the kingdom would be better off if Akudu simply mimicked his predecessor. Whispers in the halls only reinforced the humiliation, branding him as a disappointment, a pale shadow of the man who came before him. The weight of those words crushed his pride, igniting a fury that refused to be extinguished. His hands clenched into fists as he vowed that, when the time was right, he would have his revenge. Back within the palace, the king sat in silence, his disappointment lingering. He had once believed Akudu to be a capable man, yet it had become clear that the young noble had built his reputation on the foundation of his father's name. Dilluk had been different. He had been a man of true ability, a leader who understood the king's vision. And yet it was Dilluk who had been accused of treason. The memory of that moment weighed heavily on the king's conscience. He had refused to believe it at first, unwilling to accept that someone so gifted could betray the throne. But the accusation had come from none other than Akudu, the son of Duke Higgins, a vassal too powerful to ignore. Bound by duty and fear, the king had cast Dilluk aside, stripping him of his rank and sending him away. Now, with time and reflection, regret consumed him. He stared at the wine glass in his hand, lost in thought, wishing that Dilluk could find it in his heart to forgive the weakness of his king. Meanwhile, in Tenma, life flourished in unexpected ways. Lila gazed in awe at the clear glass of water she now held, marveling at the simple luxury that had once been scarce. Dilluk stood nearby watching as Lila took her first sip, his expression softening at her wonder. The girl had never dreamed of having so much water to drink. But now, thanks to him, she no longer had to worry. Letica, on the other hand, observed the new well with amazement, her mind struggling to grasp the ingenuity behind it. Ever humble, directed the credit to Cindy, whose mastery of alchemy had made the well a reality. The Kuma Bears regretted the fact that Cindy had not been present to witness Dilluk's heroism during their mission at the mountains. Though flustered by their praise, Dilluk could not help but laugh. As he observed the thriving town, he realized just how essential water was, not only for survival but for prosperity. Agriculture would flourish, homes would be sustained, and the people would live without the burden of scarcity. Then, without warning, the quiet moment was interrupted by the unmistakable chime of the skill board. Cindy immediately took notice, her eyes sharp with understanding. Dilluk guessed that it was an indication that he had earned new Lord points. The notification confirmed it. He had gained exactly 1,000 points. The realization dawned on him that he could now summon a new heroic spirit. Excited, he quickly extended his hand, activating an ancient summoning skill. A radiant beam lit up the town, crackling with energy. As the light faded, a dark-haired figure emerged. Dilluk and the Kuma bears ventured into the mountains in search of the source of the water shortage. There they encountered and defeated a rock golem that had been obstructing the water flow. With the blockage removed, water once again surged back into Tenma, restoring the village's supply. As a result of this successful mission, Dilluk earned 1,000 points, granting him the opportunity to summon a new spirit. Utilizing an ancient summoning technique, Dilluk called forth a striking spirit with dark hair, who introduced herself as Alice. The moment he laid eyes on her, he found himself momentarily entranced, an unexpected reaction that did not go unnoticed. Sensing his awe, Alice grew self-conscious, and Dilluk, noticing her unease, reassured her not to be nervous. After formally introducing himself, Alice repeated her name in full, Alice Alicia. When Dilluk extended his hand for a handshake, Alice tensed even further, her discomfort becoming more apparent. Observing the interaction, Cindy quietly pointed out to Dilluk that Alice might be overly shy. Dilluk agreed, and Cindy, puzzled by Alice's nervousness, remarked that despite her reserved demeanor, Alice was a renowned spirit known for her exceptional cooking skills. This revelation caught Dilluk by surprise, prompting Alice to affirm Cindy's statement, acknowledging that cooking was indeed her specialty. Intrigued, Dilluk watched as Cindy, clearly excited, expressed her anticipation of tasting Alice's food. Without hesitation, Cindy took Alice's hand and eagerly encouraged her to demonstrate her culinary skills. The group soon moved to the kitchen, where Cindy proudly showcased an array of kitchen utensils she had personally crafted through alchemy. She assured Alice that she was free to use them as she wished. Wasting no time, Alice prepared herself for the task ahead, tying back her hair before getting to work. With swift and precise movements, she skillfully handled the ingredients and utensils, fully immersed in her element. As Dilluk observed her, he noted how much more confident she seemed when engaged in something she loved. Before long, Alice had completed her dishes. She presented a feast consisting of grilled wild boar meat, boar cheeks braised in cream, wheat noodles, and chicken broth. The sight of the food impressed Dilluk, who complimented its appearance. However, he quickly realized that Alice had prepared an excessive amount for just 3 people. Noticing this, Alice became flustered, admitting that she hadn't meant to overdo it. To ease her worries, Dilluk assured her that it was not an issue and instead proposed that they host a feast. With that, the group decided to share the meal with the villagers of Tenma, turning the occasion into a grand celebration. As the feast finally began, everyone gathered around Dilluk's dining table. The demi-humans wasted no time devouring the meal, marveling at how tender the meat was, which was something they had never experienced before. Cindy, meanwhile, was too busy stuffing her mouth to even comment. Among the group, one of the Kuma bears suggested that Alice should consider opening her own restaurant. In response, Alice mentioned that she once ran a canteen in the past. Dilluk, equally impressed, showered Alice with praise, admitting that this was the most incredible dish he had ever tasted. To his surprise, Alice launched into a detailed explanation of her cooking process, enthusiastically breaking down the techniques she used. She described how the freshness of the ingredients played a vital role in the dish's flavor. Since boar meat carried a strong odor, it was normally difficult to prepare, but by properly draining the blood, she was able to cook it well. Thanks to Cindy's freezer, the vegetables remained fresh, allowing for a richer taste. She also noted that while the ingredients typically had a lot of scales, she had taken care to remove them properly before mixing everything into the chicken broth, enhancing the dish's overall flavor. As Dilluk listened, he struggled to grasp the technicalities of her explanation, but still nodded along, claiming to understand everything she said. Dilluk's brain was buffering, but at least he was full. Recognizing Alice's deep passion for cooking, he remarked on how much she truly loved it. Alice chuckled in response, admitting that she did indeed enjoy it more than anything. Once everyone had finished their meals, Dilluk expressed his gratitude to Alice, noting that he already felt energized after eating. Alice explained that this was due to one of her abilities. Curious, Dilluk checked the notifications board and discovered that consuming Alice's food had boosted his magical powers and increased his resistance to magical attacks. Alice confirmed that this effect was real. Her cooking not only strengthened a person's magic but also made them more resistant to various elemental forces. The resistance depended on the flavors of the dish. Spicy food increased resistance to fire, while salty food enhanced resistance to air. However, she clarified that the effectiveness of the enhancement wasn't determined by how delicious the food was, but rather by its magical properties. Understanding the significance of Alice's abilities, Dilluk acknowledged that he could try to replicate the effects of her cooking, but admitted that he could never match her skill in making such delicious meals. In response, Alice reassured him that she would handle all the cooking, as her only wish was to make Dilluk happy. Touched by her words, Dilluk sincerely thanked her, appreciating the kindness and dedication behind her efforts. Later on, Alice explored Tenma and made a startling realization. She seemed to have traveled back 4,000 years. Determined to uncover what kinds of food were available in this era, She eagerly scouted the surroundings. To her absolute delight, she stumbled upon something extraordinary. Rice. Alice practically squealed in excitement at the sight of the golden grains, but Dilluk only stood there, perplexed. When he asked what rice was, Alice froze, staring at him as if he had just insulted her entire bloodline. Dilluk then explained that they had always assumed the plant was some kind of weed. Dilluk unknowingly insulted an entire generation of Asians. At that moment, something inside Alice snapped. She launched into an impassioned rant about how rice was not only an incredible crop, but also one of the tastiest foods ever. It could even be used to make sake. More than that, she declared, it was a universal product. Dilluk, still struggling to process how a so-called weed could be edible, was skeptical. The struggling village of Tenma had never thought to use it. Seeing his hesitation, he asked Alice if she knew how to grow it. She assured him that rice grew extremely well under the right conditions, and the soil in this region was perfect for cultivation. Seeing an opportunity to improve the village's food supply, he requested her guidance in learning how to grow it. Alice readily agreed, eager to share her knowledge. However, Dilluk remained skeptical, still questioning whether the plant was truly edible. Amused by his doubts, Alice took it upon herself to prepare a meal using rice, determined to prove its worth. Once the dish was complete and Dilluk had the chance to taste it, his skepticism faded, replaced by genuine surprise at its rich flavor. As time passed, Cindy observed that Alice had adjusted well to life in the village, a sentiment Dilluk shared. He acknowledged that since her arrival, the quality of their meals had improved significantly. The memory of his first taste of rice remained fresh in his mind, and he admitted that he had never expected it to be so flavorful. Recognizing its potential, he saw rice cultivation as a viable solution to the village's ongoing food shortages. Beyond their agricultural concerns, Tenma also faced financial difficulties. Aware of this, Dilluk had been working on a plan to generate more income by selling additional magic items. However, Cindy reminded him of his previous dealings with the Maple Trading Company. Acknowledging the challenges that had arisen from that encounter, Dilluk explained that he had since been searching for a way to mass-produce the items more efficiently. In pursuit of a solution, he had turned to the dwarves for assistance. That very day, a representative from the trading company was scheduled to visit Tenma. The meeting carried the potential to open new opportunities for the village's economy. Excited by the prospect, Cindy urged Dilluk to head to the workshop without delay. Dilluk and Cindy made their way to the workshop where they were warmly greeted by the leader of the dwarves. Dilluk, mindful of their work, apologized for the intrusion, but the dwarf reassured him that they were on break and that there was no need to worry. Cindy was fascinated by the workshop's impressive setup, so the dwarf proudly mentioned the exceptional craftsmanship of his people. He even noted that they had recently completed a major project. Without wasting any time, the dwarf presented Dilluk with the magic cups. Cindy was immediately captivated by their flawless design as they looked indistinguishable from the ones she had originally created. The level of precision amazed her, while Dilluk felt immense relief because his trade concerns were now resolved. Accepting the cups, he assured the dwarf that he would be well rewarded for his efforts. Expressing his own gratitude, the dwarf thanked Dilluk for allowing him to dismantle the original cup, an opportunity that had enabled his team to develop a blueprint for mass production. With the process now ready to scale, Dilluk informed the dwarf that he would gather volunteers from the village to assist, entrusting the dwarf with overseeing the production. The dwarf enthusiastically accepted the role, but before moving on, he had something else to show Dilluk, a completed project that had just been finalized. Dilluk's anticipation turned to delight upon seeing the special bracelet he had requested. Curious about the item, Cindy inquired about its function. The dwarf explained that magical energy naturally regenerates over time, and this bracelet was designed to store excess energy, acting as a vault. By placing magical energy into the bracelet, the wearer could later retrieve it when needed. Even more impressively, the bracelet had been crafted using the core of the rock golem Dilluk had previously defeated. Understanding its value immediately, Dilluk gratefully accepted it, relieved that he would no longer have to waste magical energy. Cindy was equally impressed, acknowledging that as Dilluk's abilities grew, efficient magic use would become increasingly important. Dilluk agreed, explaining that this was precisely why he had commissioned the bracelet. Despite being focused on mass production, the dwarves had still made time to complete the project, something he deeply appreciated. Excited by the craftsmanship, Cindy's eyes sparkled as she admired the bracelet. She eagerly volunteered to fasten it onto Dilluk's wrist, and as he extended his hand, she carefully secured it in place. Almost instantly, Dilluk could feel the magical energy being absorbed into the bracelet. The dwarf then provided instructions explaining that squeezing the bracelet at the right moment would release the stored energy. Cindy admired how well it suited Dilluk and expressed a desire to have one for herself. Fortunately, the dwarves had crafted another with an identical design, much to her delight. However, this version was merely a replica and lacked the ability to store energy. Amused but undeterred, Cindy playfully feigned helplessness, requesting that Dilluk place the bracelet on her wrist. Before Dilluk could react, the dwarf swiftly secured it for her without hesitation. Cindy wanted a fairy tale. The dwarf gave her customer service. Cindy, momentarily stunned, had expected a more gentlemanly gesture. The dwarf, realizing his mistake, quickly apologized, explaining that he had acted without thinking. However, he was quick to compliment Cindy, insisting that the bracelet looked quite elegant on her. Flattered by the remark, Cindy's initial frustration quickly faded, leaving her satisfied with her new accessory. As Cindy admired her new bracelet, Dilluk quietly asked the dwarf if there were more available, intending to give one to White Dragon and Alice. The dwarf confirmed that he had more, but Cindy quickly caught on to their conversation. Realizing that she wouldn't be the only one with the bracelet, she grew upset. Sensing her disappointment, Dilluk tensed and explained that he preferred to keep the bracelets from becoming widespread, as their significance would lessen if too many people had them. Cindy sighed in understanding, acknowledging Dilluk's thoughtfulness. The dwarf, attempting to ease the moment, assured Dilluk that he would adjust the sizes and personally deliver the bracelets later. Checking the time, Dilluk noted that the caravan was supposed to arrive soon. Since it was their first visit, it was important to welcome them properly. Cindy, now in better spirits, agreed to go with him. Together, they left the workshop and waited outside for the caravan's arrival. As time passed without any sign of the caravan, Cindy yawned, growing impatient. Dilluk, concerned that something might have happened along the way, instructed White Dragon to take them into the air for a better view. Once airborne, Cindy soon spotted a wagon on the road below. Wasting no time, Dilluk descended and immediately recognized the clerk he had previously met. The clerk stood tensely, his posture stiff with unease. Suspicious of the situation, Dilluk's attention was drawn to a sword pressed against the clerk's throat. The weapon belonged to a figure inside the wagon, who remained partially concealed. Without hesitation, Dilluk demanded that the person step forward. A slow, menacing chuckle filled the air as the figure emerged. To Dilluk's surprise, it was Akudu. With a devilish grin, the rogue loser fixed his gaze on Dilluk, making it clear that he had come to confront him. As Cindy tried to make sense of the unfamiliar man before them, Dilluk identified him as Akudu Higgins, the king's minion and the very person responsible for his banishment. His anger flared as he demanded to know Akudu's purpose. Meanwhile, the clerk, who had just disembarked from his wagon, revealed that he had been ambushed by Akudu while traveling to Tenma. Akudu immediately silenced him with a sharp rebuke before turning his attention back to Dilluk. He stated that he had come to deliver an enticing offer. If Dilluk accepted, his past treason would be forgiven, allowing him to return to Goethel. Akudu had heard of Dilluk's life in Tenma among demi-humans, which he viewed with disgust. However, if Dilluk agreed to serve under him, he would regain his status and be reinstated in political affairs. Cindy, taken aback by the proposal, anxiously awaited Dilluk's response. Without hesitation, Dilluk unsheathed his sword and aimed it at Akudu, making it clear that he would not be anyone's pawn. He declared himself the Lord of Tenma, and warned Akudu to remember that. In response, Akudu smirked before abruptly seizing the clerk and driving a dagger into his face. He signed up for a trade deal, not facial reconstruction. He issued a chilling threat. Dilluk would have no choice but to comply, or the clerk would die. However, before Akudu could carry out his plan, White Dragon descended from the sky, its sudden presence instilling terror in him. Akudu immediately released the clerk, who, though frightened by the beast, expressed his gratitude. Still shaken, Akudu questioned the creature's nature, speculating that it might be some kind of demon. Dilluk corrected him, explaining that White Dragon was not a demon but his companion, born from his skill. Akudu was visibly stunned, having always believed Dilluk to be incapable of wielding any useful abilities. To him, Dilluk had always been an insignificant failure from a weak noble family. He scoffed at the idea that no matter how many allies Dilluk had, he would never be capable of accomplishing anything on his own. Dilluk responded with a smirk, admitting that Akudu might be right. He did rely on his friends. However, he was not powerless. With that, he brandished his sword, activating his summoning skill. Flames engulfed his blade, catching Akudu off guard. Without warning, Dilluk launched an attack, forcing Akudu into a desperate struggle. Within moments, he disarmed him, bringing his sword to Akudu's throat. Defenseless, Akudu was unable to process his defeat. Dilluk wasted no time, declaring that he would restrain Akudu using alchemist transformation. Immediately, roots sprouted from the earth, binding Akudu in place. As the defeated man struggled, Dilluk turned his back on him, assuring him that the Higgins family would eventually come looking for their so-called precious son. With the confrontation settled, Dilluk approached the clerk and expressed his regret for dragging him into the ordeal. He then urged him to come to the village for safety. Cindy, still in awe of Dilluk's strength and decisiveness, wasted no time in praising him. She took his hand, vowing to always be by his side. It was only then that Dilluk noticed the wagon had sustained damage. Though he suggested they return to town for repairs, Cindy insisted she could handle it. Using her abilities, she easily restored the wagon. Meanwhile, Dilluk found himself deep in thought. He struggled to believe that Akudu would go to such lengths just to confront him. Something felt off, but he doubted the king would simply dismiss Akudu so easily. Just then, his contemplation was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching hooves. Turning toward the source, Dilluk spotted a rider bearing a familiar crest. As the figure neared, it became clear that he was one of the king's personal riders. The rider immediately inquired about Dilluk's identity, and upon receiving confirmation, he revealed that he was searching for Akudu. Dilluk informed him that Akudu had been apprehended after attacking a civilian. The rider, taken aback, explained that Akudu had escaped from the mansion and had now committed yet another offense. Dismounting, the rider strode over to Akudu and relayed the king's orders. He was to be taken back to the capital. Producing an official document, the rider announced that as of that day, Akudu Higgins was suspended from his position as the king's aide, with the suspension extended for another 2 months. A final decision regarding his punishment would be made at a later date. Damn, his trial period just got an exclusive 2-month extension, free of charge. Akudu, horrified by the severity of his situation, was quick to assume that his father would never allow such a punishment. However, the rider crushed his hopes by revealing that Duke Higgins had already approved the decision, with written confirmation to prove it. Resigned to his fate, Akudu could do nothing but listen as the rider urged him to stop resisting. Dilluk informed the rider that he would leave Akudu in his care, to which the rider expressed his gratitude. Meanwhile, Cindy announced that she had completed the repairs. After thanking her, Dilluk suggested that they return to Tenma. However, before they could leave, Akudu called out to Dilluk, warning him that their conflict was far from over. Dilluk barely acknowledged him, focusing instead on greeting White Dragon before preparing to depart. Left powerless, Akudu pounded his fists against the ground, seething with anger as he watched Dilluk walk away. A month later, Tenma was flourishing. Crops were thriving, new houses were under construction, and the village had a steady water supply. One day, Dilluk heard a knock at his door. Standing outside was Serge, the clerk, now fully recovered. Serge expressed his relief that security in the village had improved since the incident with Akudu. Hearing this, Dilluk apologized once more for involving him in that situation. However, Serge had not come to dwell on the past. He was there bearing good news. Dilluk's magical items had sold out almost instantly. There had also been a rise in demand for magical instrument maintenance. Dilluk was pleased as he believed it was wasteful to replace items when they could be repaired. Serge, on the other hand, was astonished that Dilluk had turned the maintenance work into a thriving business. The meeting was brief as Serge had to leave soon. However, before he could go, Dilluk insisted that he stay and have a meal to prepare for his long journey ahead. Not long after, Serge found himself seated before a plate of the most appetizing food he had ever seen. Curious, he asked about the dish, and Dilluk explained that it was prepared by Alice. Alice, at first bashful, eagerly described it as a special pilaf made with deer meat, rice, and spices. However, being the nerd that she was, she detailed the cooking process, explaining that the rice was boiled with minimal water to achieve a fluffy texture, while freshly picked carrots were fried in oil before being added. Intrigued, Serge took a bite and was immediately struck by its rich flavor. He was particularly fascinated by the rice and found it exceptionally delicious. Dilluk explained that the ingredients had been grown in Tenma's own fields. Serge kept eating and noted that the spices infused every part of the dish, not just the rice. Enthusiastically, he proposed that Dilluk sell the dish through his company. Convinced that it would be a success, Dilluk agreed but insisted that the place of production be credited in the sales. With that, the two finalized their deal. Shortly after, Serge stepped outside and observed the village, now bustling with activity. The once abandoned settlement had transformed significantly, with an increasingly diverse population. Watching the dwarves and Kuma bears coexist, Serge found himself admiring Dilluk's ability to unite different races. However, Dilluk humbly acknowledged that the success of Tenma was a collective effort, crediting the villagers for their hard work. Tenma's development had only just begun, and Serge eagerly anticipated what the future held for the growing village. Meanwhile, in the neighboring town of Rosas, a civilian remarked on the remarkable development taking place in the borderlands. The person listening was taken aback, as the area had long been known for its poverty. Curious, he asked how such progress was possible. In response, the first civilian explained that the advancements were due to the leadership of their lord. Just then, the other civilian mentioned that their own town was also about to receive a new lord. However, they could only hope that their new leader would be as capable as the one in Tenma. Dilluk continued expanding his business, selling more magical items like the enchanted cups. In addition to that, he also began selling vegetables, which impressed the clerk from the Maple Corporation. During their conversation, the clerk mentioned hearing rumors that Dilluk had expanded his territory. Dilluk confirmed that the expansion was recent and largely due to the king's persuasion. With no one else available to govern the area and Tenma steadily growing, the land under his jurisdiction had increased significantly. When the clerk inquired about the extent of this influence, Dilluk explained that it now covered the forests and waterways, reaching all the way to the town of Rosas. Upon hearing this, the clerk became visibly concerned. Noticing the reaction, Dilluk asked what was wrong, prompting the clerk to reveal that he had overheard a conversation a few days ago. Akudu had become the new leader of Rosas. Dilluk was taken aback by the news, but the clerk reassured him that there was no immediate cause for alarm. Satisfied that he had delivered the information, the clerk soon took his leave, and Dilluk bid him farewell. Left alone, Dilluk reflected on what this development could mean. Aristocrats expelled from the central regions of the country were often sent to the countryside, and Duke Higgins likely saw this as a chance for Akudu to redeem himself. However, if Akudu was plotting something, Tenma could be at risk. Not long after, Dilluk shared the news with Cindy, informing her that Akudu had been appointed as the lord of the neighboring town. As expected, she was furious, immediately expressing her desire to punch him. Dilluk, however, urged her to stay calm, reasoning that the situation wasn't dire. Since Tenma's territory now bordered Rosas through the woods, it was simply a matter of being cautious. The Kuma bears were already guarding Tenma and were capable of handling the expanded area. Even so, Dilluk wanted to be prepared in case of an attack. He had also been considering traveling to new territories and planned to leave Devado, the leader of the dwarves, in charge while he was away. Hearing this, Cindy insisted on accompanying him. With that decision made, they set off for the woods. Deeper in the woods, Dilluk observed that while there weren't many miasmas, there was an abundance of monsters. The dense forest provided ample hiding spots, making it a strategic location in case of an attack from Akudu. To prepare for any potential threats, Dilluk decided to set traps. Without delay, he and Cindy began placing various traps throughout the area. However, after some time, Cindy grew exhausted. Dropping onto the ground, she grumbled about the sheer size of the forest, complaining that it was impossible to cover the entire area with traps. Dilluk acknowledged the difficulty, noting that the forest extended all the way to the sea. They neither had the time nor the energy to trap the entire region. At that moment, a notification sounded from the taskbar. Dilluk had accumulated 1,000 points, which he suspected was due to the successful sales of magic tools and the expansion of his territory. Recognizing an opportunity, he remarked that it would be beneficial to have a spirit with defensive skills and extensive knowledge. Cindy, thrilled by the idea, eagerly anticipated what would happen next. Curious about the spirit that awaited him, Dilluk activated the ancient summoning skill. As he unleashed his power, a new heroic spirit appeared before him. She was a tall, striking woman with long hair. Her name was Carrot Sandy. Dilluk welcomed her warmly, expressing his gratitude that she had answered his call. He introduced himself, then he explained that they were in the territory of Tenma. They were 4,000 years in the future. Shocked by the revelation, Carrot took a moment to process her situation. Determined to be of service, she expressed her willingness to help. With that, she and Dilluk shook hands, solidifying their cooperation. Cindy then greeted Carrot and the two immediately recognized each other, happy to reunite after so long. Cindy cryptically remarked that Carrot's arrival was perfect timing, much to Dilluk's confusion. However, before he could question it further, he was reminded of why he had summoned a new spirit in the first place. With this, he promptly asked Carrot to demonstrate her abilities. Carrot, eager and resolute, prepared to showcase her talents. However, before the conversation could continue, a horde of monsters suddenly emerged from the shadows. The group found themselves surrounded, and the situation became increasingly dire due to the overwhelming number of enemies. Dilluk remained on high alert, quickly considering his options. However, before he could act, Carrot confidently stepped forward, volunteering to handle the threat herself. Carrot arrived at the perfect moment, wielding her massive magical weapon to provoke the monsters into attacking. As they lunged, she struck the ground, sending a wave of light rippling through the forest. For a brief moment, silence filled the air before the monsters suddenly found themselves ensnared in bear traps, injured and immobilized. Dilluk, witnessing this unfold all at once, was stunned by the effectiveness of her ability. Carrot's skill, trap making, allowed her to create magical traps instantaneously by reconstructing structures she had previously learned. Additionally, she employed sight-blocking magic, making her traps invisible during the setup. Because of this, Dilluk had not noticed when she had set them. To her, the fact that her traps went undetected was proof of her mastery, as setting a trap required a deep understanding of its structure. Dilluk, realizing the immense potential of her ability, grasped Carrot's hand in disbelief. Seeing this, Cindy gasped. Carrot's magic was undetectable. Cindy's side-eye wasn't. Carrot's ability was an ideal fit for the defensive needs of the expanding territory. As the lord of the land, Dilluk had to ensure the safety of his people from potential threats, whether from monsters or outsiders. Carrot acknowledged the responsibility he carried, and assured him that he had summoned the right person for the task. Cindy, eager to emphasize Carrot's importance, revealed that Carrot had once built a castle in Tenma during ancient times. Dilluk, caught off guard by this revelation, found it difficult to believe. Carrot, however, downplayed the accomplishment. Cindy further explained that ancient Tenma had been a thriving kingdom ruled by a powerful monarch, where people had cultivated their own culture and lived in harmony. The castle, which Carrot had built, had served as a crucial center of protection, ensuring Tenma's quiet development. As Dilluk processed this information, Carrot turned the conversation to Cindy, revealing that she had once been a royal alchemist responsible for crafting magical tools for the royal family. She had even been known as the Alchemist of Tenma. Dilluk, unaware of Cindy's prestigious past, was taken aback by yet another unexpected revelation. Cindy, on the other hand, tried to act cool. With this newfound knowledge, Dilluk came to understand the significance of Tenma's past. Once a place of peace and innovation, the kingdom had flourished under strong leadership and well-established defenses. The castle had stood not just as a fortress, but as a symbol of security and growth. Dilluk had never considered the possibility of constructing a castle as a defensive stronghold. In ancient times, the castle had been built to protect lives, allowing culture and civilization to flourish within its walls. This realization left him wondering if such a castle could be recreated in the present day. Noticing that he was deep in thought, Cindy checked on him. Dilluk then stated that Tenma urgently needed defensive power. If reconstructing the ancient castle was possible, it could greatly improve the region. He was eager to witness civilization taking shape before his eyes. Without hesitation, he pulled out a map from his bag and showed it to Carrot. The terrain had remained mostly unchanged over the centuries, making reconstruction feasible. Since Carrot had been involved in the original castle's construction, adjustments would need to be made to accommodate the current landscape. However, Carrot reassured Dilluk that she was capable of handling it. Cindy, pleased by the plan, offered her assistance. With that, the three agreed to begin building the castle. Meanwhile, in Rosas, panic spread among the townspeople as news circulated that the agricultural trade had suddenly come to a halt. One distressed civilian voiced his frustration while another admitted to being unsure of the reason. It was clear, however, that this was an order from the new lord. Anxiety grew as they realized that only merchant guilds personally recognized by the lord were now permitted to trade in the city. The sight of yet another tax increase only added to their frustration. Since the new lord's arrival, all of their taxes had been funneled directly to him, leaving them struggling. One civilian cautioned his friend to lower his voice, fearing that the lord might hear them. Left with no options, they could only wonder what had become of their once thriving town. At the same time, within the halls of power in Rosas, a messenger informed the lord that the new regulations on commerce and the latest tax increase had been successfully implemented. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Listening with satisfaction, Akudu smirked. He had finally seized control of Rosas, and soon his sights would be set on overtaking Tenma. The Kuma Bears reported to Dilluk that their patrol around the village had been completed. On top of that, the village's security had been significantly relaxed. Dilluk expressed his gratitude, thanking the Kuma Bears for their dedication. The fence and moat surrounding the village were now fully constructed as well, a testament to Carrot's brilliant defense strategies. Carrot, with a humble shrug, claimed that her trap-making skills were practically child's play. She was, after all, a master of traps. Her magic allowed her to instantly recreate any trap she had designed. Not only was she a trap master, but also an exceptional architect who had once worked on the construction of the ancient Tenma castle. Carrot then shared exciting news. They were finally ready to begin reconstructing the ancient Tenma castle. Dilluk's eyes lit up because this had become his new goal. The Kuma Bears, ever eager to help, offered to assist in the castle's construction, insisting they couldn't let Carrot shoulder all the burden. Though initially hesitant about working with such a large team, Carrot couldn't resist a smile as the leader of the Kuma Bears reassured her that physical labor was their specialty. Reluctantly, she agreed to let them join. As they discussed the plans, Dilluk's mind drifted. The Kuma Bears were stationed in Tenma as warriors, currently sharpening their combat skills during guard duties. The thought of so many responsibilities piling up concerned him, knowing that too much to do could easily become a problem. That's when Dilluk spoke up, announcing that he would summon a new ally using his ancient summoning skill. He noted that having more people in Tenma would be a significant advantage. His gaze shifted to his dashboard, where he saw he was just 200 points away from the required threshold to summon another spirit. Reassured, he knew it wouldn't take long to reach his goal. Hearing this, Carrot reminded him that there was no need to rush the summoning, but Dilluk was quick to clarify that he wasn't in a hurry. He was determined to do everything he could for Tenma, and it consumed his every thought. Carrot smiled, touched by the realization of just how strong a leader Dilluk truly was. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Dilluk worked tirelessly to accumulate the points he needed. He did tasks such as fetching water, crafting magic cups, training the Kuma bears, cooking, and producing various items. Before long, he had enough points to complete the summoning. He stood tall, magic coursing through him as he summoned a new spirit, leaving the Kuma bears wide-eyed with amazement. When the magic subsided, a figure appeared before him. This spirit was named Bulk, an old warrior with an air of nonchalance. Dilluk greeted him warmly, but the old man responded with a swift and unfriendly swing of his sword, catching Dilluk completely off guard. That's what you get for summoning Gramps from the retirement home. Though he managed to block the attack, the Kuma bears were furious at the audacity of the stranger who dared to strike their lord. The old man, unfazed, explained that he had no interest in serving a powerless fool. If Dilluk wanted his obedience, he would first have to prove his strength. Dilluk stood frozen for a moment, taken aback by the challenge. The old man's smirk widened as he clarified. This would be a one-on-one fight. Dilluk, never one to back down, unsheathed his sword and declared that he accepted the challenge. The old man's eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and respect. He had been hoping for this, and he was eager to see what Dilluk was made of. Bulk immediately assumed a battle-ready stance, radiating an aura of overwhelming power that made Dilluk feel small and vulnerable. The pressure of it hit Dilluk before he even had a chance to glance at his skill board. A strange sensation washed over him, something similar to a surge of energy he couldn't quite understand. Bulk smirked, recognizing the power coursing through Dilluk. It was Chi, he believed, the very force behind the ancient summoning power. Dilluk, unaware of what Chi truly meant, pushed aside his curiosity. What mattered was that Bulk was clearly a skilled warrior. If he didn't take this seriously, he wouldn't stand a chance. Dilluk readied himself, determination hardening his resolve. He knew he couldn't afford to lose. Without hesitation, he launched the first strike, clashing swords with Bulk in a violent explosion of steel. The battle raged on relentlessly, both warriors pushing their limits. But Bulk, sensing the immense power in Dilluk's chi, was momentarily caught off guard. That was all the opening Dilluk needed. With precision, he unleashed the Ravello-style technique, combining it with a Star Shadow Slash for maximum impact. The resulting explosion sent Bulk flying backward, the force of the attack leaving him stunned. As the dust cleared, Bulk, looking impressed, knelt before Dilluk in acknowledgement of his strength. His admission of defeat was respectful, yet the sight of an older, seasoned warrior kneeling before him made Dilluk uneasy. He quickly urged Bulk to rise. Bulk, still on one knee, praised Dilluk's mastery over his chi. Dilluk, now curious, seized the opportunity to ask what chi was. The question took Bulk by surprise. The knowledge of chi had been lost to the current era, and its meaning was beyond most people's understanding. Bulk explained that chi was a force acquired through rigorous training, separate from magic. Those who mastered chi experienced enhanced physical abilities, and the aura it emitted was beyond description. Dilluk's confusion cleared, and now he understood that the overwhelming sensation he had felt earlier was chi. Bulk then revealed that Dilluk's chi was exceptional, far beyond ordinary mastery. It was classified as hard chi. Chi, he explained, was divided into two forms, hard chi and soft chi. Hard chi was used to repel demons, while soft chi allowed the user to control them. Dilluk, recalling the sensation he had experienced, recognized that it had been hard chi. Bulk further revealed that in all his years of experience, the only person he knew to wield hard chi was the legendary Sword King, Berserk. Dilluk was stunned. Bulk went on to explain that Berserk had once been his disciple in ancient Tenma, though the legendary swordsman's power had surpassed even his own. Now Bulk was faced with a warrior from a different time, one who possessed the same extraordinary abilities as his late disciple. Dilluk, humbled, remarked that it was intimidating to be compared to someone so remarkable. Bulk, seeing the humility in Dilluk, appreciated it as a reflection of great leadership. With a respectful bow, he pledged his assistance to Dilluk, vowing to fight by his side in future battles. Meanwhile, the Kuma bears, who had been listening closely to the conversation, stepped forward with determined eyes. Their leader, summoning all the courage he had, approached Bulk with a request to be trained under his guidance. He remembered Bulk's earlier claim that anyone could cultivate chi through rigorous training. Even if there was a chance they wouldn't succeed, the Kuma bears were willing to try. They wanted to grow stronger to protect Tenma. As Bulk looked at them, he recalled that his grandfather once spoke of the Kuma bears as proud warriors of the old days. Seeing that same fire in their eyes now, he was reminded of that legacy. Dilluk added his support to the Kuma bears' request, making it impossible for Bulk to refuse. Though he warned them that his training would be grueling and unforgiving, the Kuma bears accepted without hesitation, grateful for the chance to learn. Not far away, Carrot spotted Bulk and expressed her joy at seeing him again. Dilluk took the moment to inform her that the Kuma bears would now be training under Bulk, which meant Carrot would be handling the full responsibilities of the castle in his absence. He apologized for not being able to increase the number of workers, but reassured her that the villagers had agreed to help. Carrot, unfazed, promised to take care of everything. Meanwhile, Bulk mentioned that he was eager to see strong warriors guarding their new stronghold. Dilluk echoed his sentiment with quiet anticipation. Days passed, and along the coast of Tenma's territory, Bulk's training sessions continued. He pushed the Kuma bears hard, reminding them that chi thrived in strong bodies. This meant they needed to be faster, tougher, and more resilient. When Dilluk arrived, he found the training ground alive with energy. Bulk acknowledged that things had gotten intense, then asked if Dilluk had come all the way out just for a patrol. Dilluk confirmed it, explaining that this area had only recently been added to their territory, and he came for an inspection. Bulk commended him for his diligence and assured him that training was progressing well. As Dilluk watched the Kuma bears being pushed to their limits, he reminded Bulk to go easy on them before heading off to continue his rounds. Venturing into the nearby woods, Dilluk grew more cautious. He reminded himself that this coastal area had once been littered with Goroki's strongholds. Though it was now under Tenma's domain, the lack of proper oversight made it a dangerous place. That being said, he remained alert. Soon, the smell of saltwater filled the air. Dilluk stopped in his tracks, taken aback by the stunning view of the sea. Mesmerized, he stood in awe before making his way toward a dock that caught his eye. However, his exploration was cut short. Before he could take another step, a cold dagger was pressed against his throat. A band of pirates had appeared, and Dilluk was surrounded. The pirate captain stepped forward and demanded Dilluk's identity. Without hesitation, Dilluk introduced himself as the newly appointed Lord of Tenma, and turned the question back on the pirates. But the leader scoffed at the title, claiming that in the realm of the ocean, status meant nothing. Government officials like Dilluk couldn't possibly comprehend that truth. He declared that they were the wing pirate crew, the ones who truly ruled the seas. He sounds like he edits his own Wikipedia page. Dilluk's calm curiosity only provoked the crew further. A single question about whether the man was truly a pirate sparked a wave of anger, and tensions rose. Then, without warning, Dilluk grabbed a nearby pirate's spear and shattered it in one powerful grip. The pirates watched in disbelief as the weapon splintered in his hand. One of them rushed in with a sword, but Dilluk swiftly disarmed him, breaking his wrist with ease. The pirate leader leapt into the fight, raging against government rule, but Dilluk's speed outmatched his fury. With a precise slash, Dilluk knocked the man's weapon aside, leaving the entire crew unarmed and defeated. The pirates, now cornered, turned to their leader for guidance. Fear of capture and being dragged back to town loomed heavy. The leader held his ground, accusing Dilluk of disrupting the peace they had finally found. Dilluk didn't respond, and he simply watched as the man's hysteria took over. Clutching his dagger, the leader swore not to let the government steal his home. Dilluk, recognizing the inevitability of conflict, braced himself. The pirate charged, but Dilluk soared into the air, unleashing the Revealo-style moon-filled rotating sword dance. Attack name so long it sounded like an ad. The move was dazzling and almost unreal. The pirate leader, stunned by the sight, could barely react before Dilluk summoned White Dragon. The majestic beast appeared instantly, and Dilluk leapt onto its back. Hovering above, he stared down at the pirates while the leader stood frozen in disbelief. The dragon was real, and with that realization, the fight drained out of him. As the man knelt in surrender, Dilluk returned to the docks and asked to hear the pirate's story. What followed was an unexpected calm. The four of them sat together, the tension replaced by quiet conversation. The pirate leader recounted a life of hardship. They experienced forced labor under cruel nobles pitted against each other in bloodsport for mere coins. Their escape to the sea had been an act of survival. The ocean offered freedom, a place to live without chains. But that freedom came with the fear of being sent back to the same oppression. When Dilluk asked why the pirate had surrendered upon seeing White Dragon, the answer came with reverence. The leader spoke of a legend, passed down by a companion back in town, an ancient dragon from a time of peace, prosperity, and unity, a time when hunger and discrimination had no place. Dilluk knew instantly that the man was speaking of the legendary era of ancient Tenma. The pirate confessed that their journey had always been driven by that dream, to sail freely in search of peace, to find a symbol of hope, and to live without fear. But reality had been harsher, and they survived by raiding the rich. Dilluk didn't respond with judgment. He saw not criminals but survivors of oppression. As if reading his thoughts, the pirate leader said their actions were revenge for being oppressed. Still, Dilluk reminded them that their crimes couldn't be excused outright. Yet, instead of punishment, he offered a choice. He asked if they were willing to trade with Tenma Village. Confused, the pirates listened as he proposed hiring them, offering fair pay, a home, and the chance to put their seafaring skills to good use. The pirate leader was skeptical, unsure why Dilluk would be so lenient. Dilluk explained it plainly that they shared the same dream. The legendary era the pirate had longed for wasn't a myth. It once existed, and Dilluk intended to revive it. His ancient summoning abilities allowed him to call forth spirits from that golden age. With their help, and perhaps the help of these pirates, he could bring that world back. Then Dilluk extended his hand. There would be no orders, no threats, only cooperation. In Tenma, everyone had a place. Moved by the sincerity of the offer, the pirate leader stood and met Dilluk's gaze. He reached out, accepting the hand and asking if Dilluk would help him realize his dream too. It was a hopeful request born from years of despair. Dilluk smiled and agreed, reassuring the man that they dreamed of the same future. In that moment, a new alliance was formed. After their agreement with Dilluk, the pirates held up their end of the deal. They worked diligently to return all the stolen goods, and as promised, their leader shared valuable information about the sea. From coastal security to edible marine resources, the knowledge they offered exceeded Dilluk's expectations. As a final gesture, the pirates gifted their ship to Tenma. Their leader, Dodoria, announced his retirement, declaring that from that day on, the vessel would serve as Tenma's official fishing boat. The ship bore the crescent moon emblem of the Ravello family, alongside the image of a wyvern. Dilluk gratefully thanked Dodoria for the gesture. Alice was over the moon. With the ship, they could finally reel in delicacies like fatty sea bream and tender octopus. The thought alone felt surreal. Dilluk then rallied the group, suggesting they set out to fish immediately. One of the pirates eagerly agreed, saying they'd lower the gangway so everyone could come aboard. Soon after, they set sail. As the boat cut through the waves, Dilluk admired the calm weather. The journey was smooth, and the pirates did their best to make everyone feel welcome. Amidst the light atmosphere, Dodoria found himself glancing at Cindy and Alice, quietly wondering if they too were legendary spirits from a mythical age. Others shared his thoughts. Dilluk's ability to summon powerful beings still puzzled them. Cindy eventually approached Dodoria, asking if they could head farther out to fish. Dodoria agreed, saying the weather favored that direction. When she thanked him, Dodoria expressed deep gratitude for being pardoned. Cindy looked puzzled, reminding him that Dilluk had already forgiven him. Dodoria admitted he wasn't used to being treated as an equal, but Cindy reassured him that he'd adjust once he became part of Tenma. She explained that Dilluk's vision was simple, a land where everyone could be happy, without exception. Her words stirred something warm in the pirates' hearts. Cindy then excused herself, promising to return with a bounty of fish for the villagers. She found Dilluk and asked about detection, curious if he could sense anything nearby. Dilluk replied that monster detection felt familiar now, and he was beginning to master it. Closing his eyes for a moment, he focused. Then he calmly stated that a school of fish was circling below. Cindy was visibly impressed, unable to hide her admiration. Just then, Dovato approached, reporting that the magic tools were ready. Cindy had designed a fishing device that could generate ocean currents, guiding fish directly into the net. She had her sights set on catching extra large ones. Dilluk was genuinely impressed and thanked her, which made Cindy beam with pride. She declared she would do anything for him. As Cindy called out instructions to set up the net, she noticed Alice was already tossing it overboard a bit early. Cindy warned her, but Alice admitted she just couldn't wait. Thankful for Alice's cooking talents, Cindy helped her lower the net. Alice hummed a hopeful tune, wishing for a big haul. Suddenly, Dilluk stopped them. Alice had just heard a strange sound. To their shock, the net had been torn apart. Dilluk's expression turned grim. Something was lurking beneath the boat. The group looked over the edge only to be met with the chilling sight of a horned sea beast baring its jagged teeth. With the open sea offering no safe escape, tension gripped the air. When you're just fishing for dinner and pull up the final boss, Cindy called out to Dilluk just as he confirmed what they all feared. They were facing a sea monster. A thunderous roar erupted from the depths, shaking the air and sending chills down everyone's spines. Panic surged through Dodoria as he recognized the creature. The great sea beast, Totose. He had heard legends of it before, how it impaled ships with its massive horns. Dilluk quickly assessed the situation. A direct confrontation was too dangerous. They needed to move the ship away immediately. Knowing this was no ordinary threat, he summoned White Dragon. In an instant, the dragon soared through the sky, its presence stunning the pirates into silence. Without hesitation, Dilluk gripped White Dragon's claws, lifting off the ship. Cindy called out to him, unsure of his plan, but Dilluk offered no explanation. Instead, he used himself as bait, drawing Todosaru's attention away from the ship. He needed to lead the beast farther out, away from the others. White Dragon swooped down toward the sea creature as commanded, and as they descended, an unfamiliar surge of chi coursed through Dilluk. It wasn't anything he had felt before, powerful yet different. The entire crew watched tensely as he neared the beast. Then, in a moment that defied expectation, Todosaru's demeanor shifted. The once fearsome creature gazed up at Dilluk with a gentle expression, its roar replaced by calm. It smiled like a little puppy, shedding its monstrous aura in an instant. Seeing that Dilluk was safe, everyone finally got to breathe. At that moment, White Dragon praised Dilluk for his masterful use of soft chi, a technique not easily wielded. While still hovering above the waters, Dilluk gently patted the sea beast's head, urging it not to cause such trouble again. With the crisis averted, he returned to the boat, where Cindy rushed toward him in tears, overwhelmed with relief. Though grateful, Dilluk felt a twinge of guilt. He hadn't meant to worry anyone, but there had been no time to explain his plan. Dodoria, still in awe, expressed his disbelief that Dilluk had managed to tame Todoseru, the fabled ruler of the sea. Dilluk explained that it was the power of soft chi, a force handed down from the ancient Tenma. The leader of the Kuma Bears added that Bulk had once said how difficult the technique was to master, further proving that Dilluk was no ordinary person. Alice agreed, affirming that such greatness was simply expected from him. Soon after, Devato stepped forward, announcing that Cindy had already repaired the net, allowing them to return to their plans on fishing. Before long, the entire ship was brimming with fresh fish, much to everyone's delight. Alice, nearly overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of seafood ingredients, couldn't hide her excitement to start cooking. She then gave credit to Dodoria for his sea knowledge and expressed gratitude to Cindy for her magical tools that had helped make the haul possible. Just then, one of the pirates pointed to a fish in the pile, asking whether it was edible. Alice's mood flipped and her expression turned wild as she questioned how anyone could not know the greatness of tuna. Dilluk surprisingly admitted he had never tried it. Disappointed but determined, Alice made it her mission to change that. Looking over the group, she demanded they try it immediately. With precision and flair, Alice sliced the tuna, impressing everyone with her skills. Dilluk was amazed at the fish's size, while Cindy couldn't help but boast about Alice's expertise in seafood dishes. Soon Alice presented her finished plate, beautiful sashimi crafted from the fresh tuna, and apologized for the wait. Dilluk admired the visual appeal of the dish, while Cindy commented on the delicate sea aroma it carried, stirring nostalgic memories. Alice blushed, realizing she may have sliced too much, but Dilluk insisted it was fine and that they should enjoy it. Without hesitation, they set up the table and the feast began. Dilluk was instantly captivated by the flavor, noting he'd never tasted such richness in fish before. Alice explained that her method involved aging each fish to peak flavor and suggested a simple touch of salt for the best experience. She asked whether Dilluk had made the sweet salt himself, but he clarified that it was actually her own mimicry. Cindy, hearing all the effort behind the preparation, finally understood why the dish tasted so incredible. As everyone enjoyed the meal, Dilluk noticed the pirates hadn't joined in. He invited them to the table, which shocked them because they weren't used to being treated like equals. Dilluk assured them it was only natural. In Tenma, there were no social hierarchies. All sat at the same table, regardless of origin. He led the pirates to sit, promising they wouldn't regret tasting Alice's food. Dodoria, still hesitant, took a bite, and tears welled up. The taste was beyond anything they had ever stolen. One by one, the pirates joined in, all moved to tears by the unexpected blessing. That one bite got the pirates ready to pay taxes and go to therapy. Dodoria turned to Dilluk, expressing his gratitude for their meeting him, although it was only recent. Dilluk was about to formally welcome them when he remembered there was someone more fitting for the task. He called for White Dragon, who descended from the sky with majestic grace. Soon, the pirates were on its back, soaring through the clouds, basking in the warmth of their new beginning in Tenma. Later, in the waters near Tenma's borders, development on the new port resumed. Dilluk observed that the pier needed repair. Dodoria sheepishly admitted he wasn't much of a builder. As Dilluk surveyed the area, he noticed scattered trees and rocks and made a mental note to consult Carrot about defensive planning. Just then, something caught his eye. Something was moving near them. He felt no trace of magic, which piqued his curiosity. Peering closer, he realized two figures were hiding in the grass. Dilluk approached the nearest bush to investigate when suddenly a girl with dog ears and tail sprang out, warning them not to come any closer. She then furiously accused Dilluk and his companions of being lackeys of Rosa's. Dilluk questioned the mysterious girl, but she warned him to stay away. She hadn't expected the human invasion to reach her homeland, and now, overwhelmed with rage, her hand began to morph into that of a beast. Dilluk recognized it, making him think that this girl was likely a demolition, a member of a tribe descended from dog-like ancestors. But before he could process more, she lashed out, accusing him of speaking too lightly about her people. They were no longer just a tribe, they had been reduced to mere pawns under the rule of Rosas. Perplexed, Dilluk was informed by Cindy that Rosas was Tenma's neighboring town. Realization struck him then. Something terrible had happened there. Wanting to know more, Dilluk introduced himself as the Lord of Tenma, and pointed out that his ship bore no crest of Rosas. But the girl wasn't convinced. Still engulfed in fury, she declared that all humans were the same. Her hatred stemmed from the destruction of her hometown, and the trauma burned too deep. When Dilluk tried to ask what Rosas had done to her people, she turned her back and vowed that humans would soon face judgment from the White Wolf. Then she vanished, leaving Dilluk with a storm of questions. What troubled him most was knowing that the one ruling Rosas was none other than Akudu. A man like that couldn't be left unchecked. As Lord of Tenma, Dilluk felt responsible for knowing the affairs of nearby lands, especially now. He suggested they follow the girl and investigate the matter further. Cindy agreed, while Dodoria voiced a more aggressive sentiment, storming Rosas to crush the oppression. But Dilluk disagreed. They needed evidence first. The girl's rage wasn't just anger, and it carried truth. Determined, the group ventured deeper into the forest, eventually riding White Dragon to save time. Along the way, Dodoria asked about the Demolition's homeland. Dilluk believed they lived in the White Wolf Forest, a region shared by both Tenma and Rosas. It had once been a safe haven for demi-humans, untouched by human governance. But then, they saw it. A section of the forest near Tenma's border burned to ashes. They descended immediately. In the middle of the scorched remains stood the Demolition Girl. The destruction was overwhelming. Cindy could barely look while Dodoria stood in disbelief. The girl, clearly angered by their pursuit, confronted them. Dilluk apologized and explained his purpose, hoping to understand what led to this devastation. She acknowledged they didn't seem to be from Rosas, and then, for the first time, revealed the truth. The White Wolf Forest had once known peace. Few monsters roamed, and miasma was scarce. Demi-humans flourished, building their homes and living in harmony. One day, Rosa sent representatives with food and gifts proposing a deal. If they submitted to Lord Akudu's rule, their lives and lands would be spared. Their chief, her grandfather, agreed, hoping to protect the village. But it was a trap. Men were forcibly taken to labor in factories and women were dragged away for the soldiers. Every week the village had to offer tributes. Akudu declared himself the god of the land, crushing their religious freedom. He demanded the destruction of the dog statues that symbolized their bond with the White Wolf. The girl's parents had pleaded to keep their beliefs intact, insisting the White Wolf was sacred. Even the chief knelt before Akudu, begging him to reconsider. But in the end, their loyalty meant nothing. The village was burned. The girl turned to Dilluk, her pain sharp. What had they done to deserve such treatment? What had her parents begged for? Dilluk had no answer. Instead, he asked about her parents' whereabouts. She didn't know. They had been taken before the fire, and since then, she hadn't seen them. Dilluk was shaken. Akudu's cruelty had gone too far. Using people's lives as tools for domination was inexcusable. The Demolitions weren't pawns. He realized that staying in the village was no longer an option, and if more were suffering, then something had to be done. He proposed that the survivors seek refuge in Tenma. The girl was stunned. She couldn't imagine being welcomed into a human village, especially when trust was a foreign concept to her. But Dilluk made it clear that whether she trusted him or not, it was unsafe to remain there, especially since too many were injured. Just then, the old chief called out to the girl, Kokoro, telling her that he supported Dilluk's offer. It was undeniable that they had reached their limit. He then thanked Kokoro for all she had done, for finding food and for trying to secure a new future. Her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. But for now, it was time to survive, even if it meant surrendering pride. With tears in her eyes, Kokoro finally agreed. But she was honest with Dilluk, telling him that she still didn't trust humans. Though she was the one accepting help, her heart wasn't ready to forgive. Dilluk understood. He too had been cast out, another victim of Akudu's tyranny. He wouldn't belittle Kokoro's pain, knowing what it felt like. All that mattered now was survival. And with that, they finally agreed to head to Tenma. Soon after, Kororo and the surviving members of her tribe arrived at Tenma. At that moment, she was taken aback by the sight of Kuma bears and dwarves moving freely throughout the village. Just then, Cindy explained that Tenma was a place where beings of all kinds lived together in harmony. Dilluk added that in this village, both faith and culture were respected and free. Upon hearing this, Kororo asked if that freedom extended to the worship of the White Wolf, and Dilluk affirmed it did. Just then, Dilluk noticed the small statue Kororo clutched tightly in her hands. It was a remnant of her past. The lone White Wolf statue that had survived the arson. Its pedestal was cracked, a silent proof of what she endured. Dilluk, recognizing its significance, offered to repair it. Kororo hesitated, torn between doubt and hope. However, after a moment of silence, she summoned the courage to place her trust in him. Using his skills in alchemy, Dilluk swiftly restored the statue. The damage disappeared, and in its place stood a symbol of her people's spirit, whole once more. Overcome with emotion, Kororo wept. Dilluk returned the statue to her, stating it was the least he could do. But more importantly, he assured her that both he and the village of Tenma would stand by her people. With the statue in hand, Kororo thanked him sincerely. She later found herself in conversation with Cindy and Dodoria, slowly trying to bridge the divide between herself and humans. Meanwhile, Dilluk remained deep in thought. Though the Demolition tribe had found temporary refuge, the root of their suffering, Akudu, still loomed. Determined, Dilluk knew that he and his allies would bring an end to the tyrant's cruelty. At breakfast, Dilluk joined the others, who were already gathered around the table in high spirits. Laughter and conversation filled the room, and even the Demolition survivors greeted him warmly. It had been several days since their relocation to Tenma, and they were slowly settling into the rhythm of their new lives. Dilluk then noted their liveliness, a stark contrast to their previous tragedy. He then checked in on one of the demolition women, asking about her injured arm, so she assured him that the potion he provided had helped her recover well. With that, Dilluk asked about Kororo's whereabouts. Elsewhere, Kororo was deep in prayer, silently hoping for the safety of her mother and father. Dilluk, quietly observing her from a distance, reflected on the reality that even though the demolition people had found refuge in Tenma, the pain of losing their homeland and loved ones could not be erased. In his heart, he had already made a promise. He would rescue Kororo's parents no matter what it took. Later that day, Dilluk called for a meeting. There, he declared his intention to stand against Akudu. The announcement stirred immediate concern. Carrot questioned whether they truly intended to strike Rosas, and Bulk warned of the dangers. Dilluk acknowledged the risk but emphasized the urgency of saving Kororo's parents. Kororo, overwhelmed, struggled to comprehend why Dilluk would go so far, risking Tenma itself for the sake of her people. However, Dilluk saw the larger picture. The clash between Tenma and Rosas was no longer avoidable. If they didn't act now, Akudu would continue his path of destruction. He could not forgive what had already been done to both Tenma's citizens and the demolition tribe. With firm resolve, he declared it his responsibility to protect everyone. Akudu's tyranny had to end. Moved by his conviction, those in the meeting rallied behind him. Carrot pledged her support, trusting his leadership. Cindy echoed the sentiment, reminding everyone that Dilluk had summoned her to Tenma, and he had always stood guard over them. She would always give him the benefit of the doubt. Dilluk smiled, humbled by their trust. Dodoria cracked his knuckles, already preparing for battle. The Kuma Bear leader also added that the life saved by Dilluk would now be used to save others. The White Dragon voiced his support as well, ready to stand with them. Dilluk then turned to Kororo, assuring her of their commitment. She smiled, agreeing to help in any way she could. With the team united, Dilluk thanked everyone and began laying the groundwork for their strategy. However, Dodoria raised an important concern. Charging directly into Rosas would cause chaos, and they needed a better approach. Dilluk agreed that invading another territory carried immense risks, and they had to avoid recklessness. Kororo reflected on a deeper complication. Their village had once straddled both Tenma and Rosas. The raid came from the Rosas side, but the village on Tenma's border had also been burned. Dodoria speculated that Akudu might claim it was a wildfire, brushing off any blame. Dilluk, however, knew they had taken every precaution not to infringe on Rosas's land. Yet Akudu's clear understanding of the border was too precise, suspiciously so. It led Dilluk to one unsettling conclusion. Someone may have been manipulating Akudu from the shadows. Carrot pointed out that if their group planned to attack Tenma, then surely the enemy had thought of the same move. That's when Dilluk stepped in with a sudden idea. They needed a just cause. His expression turned serious, and he told everyone that he would need their strength. They soon arrived near the boundary of White Wolf Forest, stepping into its edges with caution. There, Carrot gave the signal that everything was set. The wild animals in the area had already been driven away. Cindy, impressed, remarked on how surprisingly versatile Carrot could be. Dilluk then turned to White Dragon asking for a report. The scout confirmed that the coast was clear, and there were no signs of presence. Dilluk could now begin. Without delay, Dilluk activated the magic sealed in his bracelet. Cindy's eyes widened in disbelief as she didn't know that it held a massive amount of energy. A powerful surge erupted, carving a path before them. With that done, Dilluk turned to Cindy. It was her turn now. She responded with an alchemical creation, seamlessly continuing the plan. Everything was going smoothly, and Dilluk allowed himself a small smile. Just then, a loud noise interrupted them. Dilluk's expression shifted, and he suspected an attack. As he had expected, the people of Rosas had arrived. A pair of soldiers then confronted him, demanding to know why he was invading their land. One of them barked a warning. If they were intruders, they wouldn't be leaving alive. Bro talks as if they're not outnumbered. They then ordered Dilluk to state his identity. Calmly, Dilluk revealed that he was the Lord of Tenma village. The soldiers froze, stunned, asking why the Lord of Tenma was invading his own territory. Their confusion quickly turned to fury, and they swore to take him down. Without waiting, one of them lunged forward, spear raised. Dilluk met the attack with his sword, effortlessly parrying it. He smirked, confident in the outcome, but the soldiers noticed something strange. The ground beneath them felt off, and soon enough suspicion crept in. Cindy then revealed the truth. The path they stood on was newly created and was within Tenma's territory. One soldier questioned his comrade, recalling that the real border lay further past a certain tree. It turned out that near that original border path, Cindy had created decoys, trees and grass skillfully camouflaged to mislead. The Rosas soldiers had unknowingly crossed over into Tenma's land. Realization hit, and the soldiers realized they had been tricked by the darkness. However, there was no turning back now. Reinforcements drawn by the earlier noise were surely on their way, and sure enough, they arrived quickly, armed and ready. Their leader declared that the Rosas forces would claim victory. However, Dilluk stayed calm, signaling Carrot to proceed with her role. Without hesitation, she hoisted her giant hammer and slammed it into the ground. Hidden bear traps snapped up around the soldiers, locking onto their legs and stopping them in their tracks. The traps inflicted sharp pain, but Carrot reassured them that they weren't lethal, just immobilizing. Cindy chuckled, thoroughly impressed by her. Ugh, she could have gone full Saw mode. Dilluk gave the girls his thanks, but the battle wasn't over. During this opening, they needed to retreat to Tenma. Most of all, he was relying on Kororo. Kororo transformed into her beast form, surprising Carrot and Cindy. They hadn't known she had this ability. The two climbed onto her back, ready to flee. Meanwhile, Dilluk gave Kororo a final instruction: defend the village. As they left, the girls turned to look back at Dilluk, wishing him luck. Now it was their turn to fulfill their mission. Back on the field, Dilluk observed the trapped soldiers. The mechanism had a timer, and he wondered how long before they'd break free. Honestly, he hoped those with the will to escape could manage it. He addressed the soldiers, telling them he didn't want unnecessary casualties. But one soldier stood firm. If Dilluk was coming at him, he wouldn't run. Still, he seemed to be the only one, and the others looked ready to retreat. Dilluk suddenly launched his next attack. He unleashed the Revilo style with a mooncutter technique. A fierce blast of power burst forward, sending the enemy flying. Many fell in that single strike, and the injured soldiers lay in disbelief. Was this really the strength of one man? Meanwhile, Dilluk looked up, realizing that the night had ended. A new wave of soldiers would likely arrive soon, and they'd be stronger. Just then, he noticed his own hands shaking, and he suspected that maybe he had used too much magic. That's when he remembered Alice's portable provisions. She'd said she wasn't much help in a fight, but her food would give him strength. He ate the snack she'd prepared, quietly grateful that her cooking had saved him. With his magic restored, he made a vow. No matter what came next, Tenma would defend its border. That was his duty, and he would handle the executives personally. Just then, a voice spoke from the shadows. Lord Doltlin. He commented on the commotion Dilluk had caused, and questioned his boldness in acting so freely in his presence. Dilluk stood still, stunned that one of Rosas's top executives had arrived in person. The soldiers from Rosas grinned with unhinged delight as Lord Doltlin stepped forward, fully confident that Tenma stood no chance against his power. Dilluk studied the man carefully, and there was no doubt that this was one of Rosas's executives. Lord Doltlin began to speak, noting that he had heard tales about Dilluk from the Lord of the Territory. He claimed Akudu had treated him cruelly, and now he intended to retaliate. Provoking him, he said, had been a foolish mistake. Dilluk, however, found the statement odd. He pointed out that Doltlin was being rather bold, speaking that way about someone he supposedly served. However, Doltlin scoffed at the idea. To him, Akudu wasn't a master. He just a fool with money but no brains. Bro really trash-talked his boss and gave himself a promotion. He went on to call himself the finest host Dilluk would ever meet, then demanded submission. Without warning, Doltlin revealed his Morningstar weapon, which was both legendary and lethal. He declared that if Dilluk was to live as a parasite, then the credit would be his. Recognizing the danger, Dilluk instinctively put distance between them. This act seemed to amuse Doltlin, who admitted he was impressed but warned that survival wouldn't come so easily. He then vowed to demonstrate how he truly fought. Dilluk didn't deny the man's skill, and he could feel that Lord Doltlin was a formidable opponent. But then, a rustle from the forest caught Dilluk's attention. Something was approaching, but he couldn't sense any murderous intent, which only made it stranger. Soon the sound of footsteps emerged from deep within the woods. What stepped into view left him stunned. An army of demi-humans had arrived, and they were as pawns. The moment they appeared, Lord Doltlin issued a command: proceed with the mission. As Dilluk scanned the crowd, he recognized various races: Demolicians, elves, and others. Kororo had been right all along. He recalled her words from the meeting. Rosas was likely to enlist various tribes. Whether it was through coercion or manipulation remained unclear. But now, seeing them firsthand, Dilluk grasped the full scale of it. So many had been turned into soldiers, stripped of their freedom. Among them, one demi-human spoke quietly, saying he didn't want to fight. He was so scared that his limbs wouldn't even move. Meanwhile, Lord Doltlin responded with pride, claiming that this was his rare and refined talent. Dilluk asked what he meant, so Doltlin explained that the bracelets they wore were his creation, and once worn they made resistance impossible. The wearers couldn't act on their own will, nor could they remove the device. With a sneer, Doltlin dared Dilluk to come and save the people he cared about. Dilluk looked at the helpless soldiers and questioned whether they even had a choice. They couldn't even bring themselves to strike the enemy. He then condemned Doltlin, comparing him to Akudu, both tyrants who treated innocent villagers as nothing more than tools for their whims. Raising his blade, Dilluk's resolve sharpened. He would not forgive those who exploited others. As Lord of Tenma, he would fight with everything he had, and he would bring down Lord Doltlan himself. Lord Doltlan stood unfazed by Dilluk's words, brushing them off as inconsequential. With a sharp command, he summoned his sacrificial pawns, instructing them to encircle and strike. But Dilluk had not risen to his station through swordplay alone. Drawing upon the forest's abundant resources, he invoked alchemy. Vines burst from the earth, entangling the demi-humans with precision. Though his hands were forced, Dilluk expressed regret for restraining them. Fury twisted Doltlan's expression, as he hadn't expected Dilluk's skill to bail him out so swiftly. Still, the man remained undeterred. He warned that Dilluk couldn't restrain them all because sooner or later he would wear out. Doltlan barked a new command, ordering the archers to loose their arrows. In response, Dilluk unleashed the Ravello style, combining it with the Moonshadow Slash. The barrage was deflected effortlessly, leaving Doltlan both rattled and roused by the defensive technique. Not stopping there, Dilluk called forth another alchemic creation, a towering wall of earth. Doltlan hesitated, searching for an opening. In a calculated move, he seized a hostage who was none other than the chief of the Demolition tribe. Lifting the frail elder, Doltlan knew Dilluk couldn't risk attacking now. The surrounding Demolitions cried out, revealing the elder's identity. Doltlan, amused by the connection, reveled in how advantageous the moment had become. He warned Dilluk to stay put if he wished to keep the elder safe. Then, with cruel delight, he revealed that other units of the army were on their way to Tenma village. He questioned whether Dilluk cared for the fate of the girls or his precious land. Though Dilluk could send White Dragon, the cost might be high. Mocking him further, Doltlan encouraged him to abandon his pawns and rush to Tenma himself. He laughed at the dilemma, believing Dilluk's compassion would be his undoing. In Doltlan's eyes, it was poetic that Dilluk's desire to protect all had only brought ruin. However, Dilluk held firm, asking if Doltlan had never once failed himself. Doltlan dismissed the remark, calling him a stubborn fool. But his confidence faltered when Dilluk revealed the truth. Tenma village was ready. The defense had been set long ago, and the village's safety was in the hands of trusted comrades. Cindy, Carrot, Kororo, Bulk, and Dodoria. Dilluk's trust in them was unwavering. Hearing Kororo's name, the chief found strength. He asked of her safety, to which Dilluk offered brief reassurance, promising her well-being and vowing to save the rest. The words lit a fire in the old man's heart. Yet Doltlan, too caught up in his monologue, failed to notice. He spoke proudly of using demi-humans as disposable shields, prompting Dilluk to renew his vow of rescuing the innocent and reuniting the chief with Kororo. As the chief began to fight the bracelet's control, Dilluk charged. Doltlan scoffed, believing Dilluk had turned his back on the others. But Dilluk was resolute, striking forward while calling out to the chief, promising reunion with his granddaughter. The surge of emotion was enough. The chief shattered the bracelet and transformed into his beast form. Doltlan was stunned. He hadn't expected the bracelet to fail, and certainly not from a man whose strength was thought to be long spent. As the chief fled, Dilluk engaged Doltlan in battle. The other Demolitions rejoiced at their leader's freedom, watching him safely revert to his human form. Still, the chief questioned how the bracelet broke. With a sinister grin, Doltlan praised Dilluk's cunning. The bracelet had been reinforced by a morning star, a weapon designed to dominate minds. Its power made the bracelet's coercion absolute. But should the mind regain freedom, its hold would weaken. To free all the captives, Dilluk would need to destroy the source of domination, the ring itself. Doltlan laughed maniacally, knowing his fight was never meant to be easy. Raising his morning star, he prepared for another strike. Dilluk, however, was rattled. Doltlan had managed to maintain overwhelming magic while manipulating so many minds. This foe was more dangerous than he had anticipated. As Doltlan declared that the real entertainment was just beginning, a different battlefield stirred. Back near Tenma, those entrusted with its defense watched as waves of enemy soldiers advanced. Despite their readiness, the sheer number threatened to overpower them. But they knew the truth. To protect Tenma, they had no choice but to stand together. The battle erupted in Tenma Forest, and from the very beginning, the overwhelming numbers of Rosas' army pushed the heroes of Tenma to their limits. The sheer scale of the enemy force was beyond expectation. Amid the chaos, it became evident that something was wrong. The soldiers weren't just aggressive, they were being controlled. The relentless combat was wearing down even the most experienced fighters. Amid the battlefield, Dovato stumbled upon an injured demi-human. Upon closer inspection, he noticed a strange bracelet affixed to the soldier's wrist. It radiated a suspicious aura, hinting at magical origins. Dovato quickly acted, attempting to destroy the bracelets of the unconscious, hoping to free them from their mysterious trance. His efforts drew attention, as Bulk began to suspect that the enemy's magic came from a powerful source. The Kumabear agreed, noting that whoever cast this control spell could pose a serious threat to Dilluk. Still, Bulk maintained confidence in Dilluk's strength, urging the others not to worry. Dodoria, ever pragmatic, reminded the group of their mission: protect the village as Dilluk had instructed. That reminder reinvigorated their spirits, especially the Kuma bear, who resolved to see the mission through. Elsewhere, in the mountainous terrain of Tenma Domain, Cindy and Carrot clashed with Rose's forces. Cindy, wielding her alchemic skills, manipulated vines to restrain the advancing demi-humans. Carrot acknowledged her efforts, and Cindy, proud yet determined, promised she wouldn't be a burden to the team. But Carrot remained wary, knowing that the enemy's numbers were growing by the minute, and the forest kept producing more soldiers, some of whom were twisted demolitions. There was something off about the enemy. Their movements were robotic and unnatural. Cindy sensed that the source of this control was the bracelets. If those could be destroyed, maybe the demi-humans could be freed. Yet Carrot doubted they had the time or ability to disable each bracelet one by one. Cindy, however, was confident that Dilluk was already fighting the one responsible for the bracelet's magic. All they needed to do was stall the soldiers long enough for him to win. Cindy continued to entangle the enemy in vines, while Carrot struggled with the limitations of her traps. There were too many soldiers, and not enough time to prepare. Kororo, sensing the urgency, volunteered to distract the enemies, giving the others space to activate their techniques. Both Carrot and Cindy were grateful, and despite the looming danger, the girls stood their ground, fully committed to holding the line until Dilluk could turn the tide. Meanwhile, at the borders of Tenma territory, Dilluk was locked in a brutal duel against Lord Doltlin. Doltlin taunted him, threatening to seize Tenma if Dilluk lost. His slashing attacks were swift and far-reaching, forcing Dilluk on the defensive. But Dilluk couldn't attack recklessly, as many demi-humans were in close proximity. A careless strike could endanger them. Doltlin then criticized Dilluk's restraint, insisting that avoiding damage wouldn't win him the battle. As he launched into another attack, Dilluk waited, watching for the precise moment when Doltlin released his morning star. Seizing that opening, Dilluk lunged forward, but Doltlin was ready, countering with a sword and stunning Dilluk with his precision. He sneered at Dilluk's idealism, calling him naive. With no choice, Dilluk backed off, forced into a temporary retreat. Doltlin, now seething, couldn't understand Dilluk's reluctance to harm others. He remembered his own past, when survival meant never being selective with one's methods. He just trauma-dumped and crashed out. With renewed cruelty, he declared their duel would be decided by the lives of the innocent. He swung the Morning Star again, this time toward the demi-humans. But Dilluk intercepted the strike, shielding the helpless from harm. His voice rose in defiance, warning Doltlin to abandon such vile tactics. Though his approach was gentler, he reminded Doltlin that he didn't stand alone. He had allies who shared his resolve. As if in answer to that truth, Dilluk's Lord points surged to their peak, and he summoned a new spirit onto the battlefield. Before all this chaos began, the Kuma bear had questioned Dilluk's plan. He couldn't believe Dilluk was willing to defend the border using only heroic spirits. Dodoria was also skeptical, but they found comfort in knowing the mighty White Dragon could be summoned if needed. However, Dilluk had other plans. Summoning White Dragon required a tremendous amount of magic, and it was too much to risk now. Dilluk was saving that power for the aftermath of the battle if it ever came to that. His current strategy relied on accumulating Lord points and acquiring territory points during the battle itself. Once he reached the threshold, he could summon a new spirit, one tied not to raw magic but to the territory he defended. Though uncertain of which spirit would appear, Dilluk was ready to take the gamble. If his plan failed, the White Dragon would be his final option. But for now, he'd press forward with everything he had, betting it all on one last heroic summon. And what if he summoned another cooking mama? He'd be cooked, pun intended. Under the rising tension of the battlefield, Dilluk activated his ancient summoning skill, channeling a surge of magic to call forth a new heroic spirit. From the swirling energy, a powerful creature emerged, a fearsome tiger whose arrival visibly unsettled Doltlin. Dilluk quickly checked his dashboard, confirming the identity of his new ally, the legendary beast known as the Red Tiger, the Beast King, summoned at level 1. The Red Tiger acknowledged his arrival with confidence, sensing the urgency of the moment. Though Dilluk apologized for dragging the spirit into a battle immediately upon summoning, he asked for the tiger's aid. Without hesitation, the beast agreed and urged Dilluk to ride on his back. Despite the shift in momentum, Doltlin remained defiant. He sneered at Dilluk's reinforcements, claiming that no summon could match his attack speed. But as he launched his Morning Star once more, the Red Tiger intercepted the weapon mid-air, clamping his jaws around it and crushing it effortlessly. "You were saying?" As the shards of metal scattered, the beast delivered a scathing warning to Doltlin, making it clear that no one should dare threaten his brother. Seizing the moment, Dilluk launched himself from the tiger's back, invoking the Ravello style combined with a Moonshadow slash. The force of the technique surged toward Doltlin with punishing intent, symbolizing the weight of justice for the demi-humans who had suffered under him. The sheer pressure of the strike overwhelmed Doltlin, driving him into a panic and sending him tumbling to the ground. Though the blade itself didn't wound him, Dilluk wasted no time summoning enchanted vines that restrained him instantly. The red tiger watched with a smirk, amused by how lenient it was to merely subdue someone so vile. Dilluk, however, had a purpose. He turned his attention to Doltlin, explaining that true punishment awaited, not vengeance, but justice. With precision, he destroyed the control ring on Doltlin's finger, severing the enchantment that bound the demi-humans. Stripped of power and left in defeat, Doltlin broke down in tears, mourning the collapse of everything he had built through cruelty. As Doltlin stood defeated, he turned his bitterness toward Dilluk, blaming him for the revival of the Eternal Darkness successor. The accusation left Dilluk bewildered, uncertain of what Doltlin meant. The Red Tiger, however, dismissed the claim as nothing more than an excuse, a desperate attempt to shift blame. Dilluk agreed, and whatever Doltlin was talking about could wait. Right now, they had more pressing matters to deal with. He then lifted his gaze to the sky, thoughts drifting toward his comrades. Meanwhile, in another part of the battlefield, a shift had occurred. Cindy was the first to notice that the demi-humans had changed. Realization struck them all at once. They had been freed. Cheers erupted among the once-bound demi-humans, their voices rising in joy and disbelief. Carrot stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what was happening, while Cindy exhaled in relief with the thought that Dilluk had done it. To them, Dilluk wasn't just a fighter, he was a miracle. The one chosen by the ancient summoning skill, a power bestowed only upon those who carried the dignity of a king. Cindy reflected on the long years of waiting. 4,000 years since the day everything had fallen apart, when they had nearly become heroes, only to watch it all fade. And now, Dilluk had granted her a second chance at life. A chance to feel the joy of creating something meaningful for someone else again. Carrot too was lost in thought, recalling the lost legacy of ancient Tenma. Though the memories had withered over time, they weren't gone. With a true king rising, one who embodied great characteristics, prosperity was destined to return to Tenma once more. Just then, Cindy's mind wandered back to the demi-humans, realizing they must free those who were bound. The demi-humans, on the other hand, wanted to fulfill their duties by serving Dilluk. Suddenly, Carrot noticed something off-putting in the forest. Cindy stared in the direction of the sound, wondering what the voice she was hearing was. With Doltlin's defeat, the oppressive power that had held the demi-humans captive finally dissolved. Freed from their bindings, the demi-humans expressed their heartfelt gratitude to Dilluk, acknowledging that he had saved their lives. Among them, one couldn't help but gush over Dilluk, especially impressed by the presence of the formidable tiger at his side. Dilluk in turn felt relief wash over him. Glad that everyone had made it through safely, he offered his thanks to Kororo's grandfather, but the elder insisted that Dilluk was the true benefactor of their clan. A warm smile crossed the old man's face, comforted by the thought that he would soon be reunited with his granddaughter. Around them, joy spread as the long and grueling battle finally came to a close, but the peace was quickly interrupted. An elf stepped forward, his voice sharp with anguish. He declared that it wasn't over, not for him. Akudu had taken his homeland, stolen precious time with his family, and he couldn't find peace until that debt was paid in blood. Dilluk approached him calmly, acknowledging the pain he carried. Still, he gently pointed out that the elf, in his current state, wouldn't be able to pursue that vengeance. Instead, Dilluk suggested he take refuge in Tenma village for now. Can someone tell this guy he's not the main character? Suddenly, a chill swept through the forest. Dilluk sensed an unsettling presence approaching. Without hesitation, he summoned White Dragon, instructing him to inform Cindy and the others of the new development. The original plan had changed, and they now needed to bring the demi-humans with them as well. Dilluk declared that every demi-human in the forest was now under Tenma's protection. Though the task would be difficult, Dilluk placed his trust in White Dragon. He vowed to hold the line and protect the villagers of Tenma while the others made their escape. The remaining demi-humans would ride on White Dragon's back, while the tiger himself would carry Dilluk to Rosa's. The tiger, surprised by the sudden shift in plan, asked if something had changed. Dilluk replied that explanations would come later, and for now, they had to move. With that, everyone scattered, each with a mission to fulfill. Before long, White Dragon arrived at the girls' location, sparking a wave of excitement among them. Carrot had anticipated his arrival, while White Dragon expressed his relief that they were all unharmed. Without delay, he delivered Dilluk's message. They were to escort all the freed demi-humans to Tenma. He also reassured them that the demi-humans still in the forest would be safe. Though the mission ahead was far from simple, White Dragon trusted in their ability to see it through. Kororo voiced her thoughts, acknowledging that Dilluk had managed to make sense of the situation. But just as the moment settled, Cindy felt a distinct presence approaching. The sensation was familiar, likely the same one she had detected earlier. Carrot tensed, growing cautious as the presence drew nearer. What emerged from the trees was a band of furious demi-humans, filled with a singular purpose: to kill Akudu and take vengeance. Kororo quickly recognized it as a rebellion, an uprising of those who had only recently been liberated. Their rage had ignited a fire in the demi-humans the girls had just rescued, pushing them to join the movement. Kororo tried to stop them, but one among the group pushed back, questioning if they had already forgotten their pain and anger. Kororo admitted she hadn't, but she warned them not to let that anger turn into misdirected destruction. She urged them to channel it into something greater, to build a future where senseless bloodshed would no longer exist. With the support of the other heroic spirits, Kororo encouraged the demi-humans, reminding them that change was possible and that they had the strength to make it real. The Demolitians were swayed by Kororo's words. Her plea had reached them, and the fire of violence in their hearts began to settle. With the moment finally under control, Kororo stepped forward and transformed into her majestic beast form. It was filled with determination as she declared that she would personally pursue the rogue Demolition group, ensuring no more blood would be spilled under their name. White Dragon and Carrot took it upon themselves to provide cover, while Cindy was entrusted with escorting the others to Tenma. Carrot mounted White Dragon's back, placing her trust in Cindy. Cindy, in turn, rallied the Demolitions and led them toward Tenma village. As Kororo departed, her grandfather began to suspect that she was the very beast who had spoken earlier, though uncertainty lingered in his thoughts. Sensing his concern, Cindy urged him to trust Kororo's decision, assuring him that she would be fine. Elsewhere, Dilluk and the tiger were drawing near to Rosa's. As they journeyed, the tiger questioned Dilluk's intentions. Dilluk acknowledged the burning anger the demi-humans held toward Akudu, an anger well earned by his cruel actions. Still, he feared that if left unchecked, they might kill Akudu, leading to the demi-humans being seen as villains. He was determined to prevent further conflict between humans and demi-humans. Yet he also believed Akudu must answer for his crimes. Hearing all this, the tiger finally understood the urgency behind their mission. In the distance, Akudu's manor came into view. Inside the manor, a soldier delivered grim news to Akudu. Lord Doltlin had fallen to Dilluk. Enraged, Akudu immediately commanded reinforcements be sent to Tenma. Though the soldier hesitated, Akudu was unrelenting. As the soldier left, Akudu sensed another presence and turned, only to find demi-humans standing before him. They declared themselves servants of the people, ready to avenge themselves. Furious, Akudu condemned their presence in his chambers, but the demi-humans were unmoved. One of them struck him and he collapsed to the floor. Beaten and on his knees, Akudu demanded to know their purpose. One of the demi-humans, burning with fury, reminded him of their suffering, how they were worked to the bone and treated as less than human. Akudu showed no remorse, insisting they had deserved such treatment as an inferior race. His words only enraged them further, and as one raised a fist to strike again, Dilluk burst into the room. Recognizing him, the demi-humans hesitated. Dilluk addressed Akudu directly, stating that his crimes, forced labor, discrimination, were inexcusable. He reminded him that even Lord Higgins had abandoned him, and there was no longer anyone left to protect him. Akudu seemed close to surrender, but suddenly broke into a twisted smile. He mocked Dilluk, calling him a pretentious noble who dared align with demi-humans. Akudu lamented the ruin of his plans in Rosas and blamed Dilluk for destroying what he had built. If only he had more time, he believed he could have demonstrated the proper use of vassals. Infuriated, one of the demi-humans grabbed Akudu by the collar, his fist ready to deliver a final blow. But just before it landed, Dilluk stepped in and stopped him. Akudu, stunned and breathless, couldn't comprehend why Dilluk had interfered. But Dilluk's actions weren't out of mercy, they were calculated. He simply didn't want the demi-human to suffer legal consequences for taking revenge on someone like Akudu. He gently moved the demi-human's arm away and apologized, explaining that Akudu wasn't worth staining their hands. Feeling humiliated, Akudu reached for his sword. His rage consumed him as he swore he'd kill them all. The demi-humans tensed, but Dilluk warned them not to engage. Akudu laughed manically, taunting Dilluk and calling him a fool for standing alongside the demi-humans. He then raised his sword to attack, but before he could strike, Dilluk's power surged. Akudu froze mid-swing, unable to move. The pressure overwhelmed him and the sword slipped from his grasp. Forced to his knees, he asked why his body wouldn't respond. No matter how hard he tried, the force was too much to overcome. The demi-humans watched in awe as Dilluk's aura filled the room. The sheer weight of his presence left them speechless, unsure if he was truly just a noble. Dilluk then turned to them and assured them that it was over. Akudu wouldn't be able to move for a while and the country's guards were already on their way. At last, Rosas would see change. Akudu's reign had come to an end. Just then, Dilluk voiced his intent to make Akudu's crimes known to the public. While it wasn't the revenge the demi-humans had originally wanted, their leader agreed that this path was wiser. Akudu, he said, wasn't even worth punching. Dilluk smiled quietly, relieved that he had made it in time. He then looked out the window, his thoughts drifting to Tenma village, wondering how things were unfolding there. In the mountains of Rosas, Dilluk traveled with the Red Tiger. The Red Tiger noticed that the remnants of Roses had also decreased significantly. Dilluk explained that this was because the forces of Tenma had come through, defeating them one after another. Most of the mercenaries seemed to be fleeing, and the remaining soldiers were, so to speak, accomplices of Akudu. Dilluk agreed, noting that they seemed quite troublesome. Previously, Dilluk had asked the demi-humans to hand Akudu over to the guards once they arrived. Now that Akudu was bound, Dilluk excused himself to return to Tenma village. Just then, one of the demi-humans warned Dilluk that Akudu had earlier commanded his soldiers to attack Tenma. It might have been unnecessary interference, but the demi-human warned him anyway. It was probably the Roses cavalry that advanced. Roses had the strongest unit, and some of them could even use magic. They were people of noble birth who had fattened their own bellies alongside Akudu. Driven by desire and pride, they wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary. With this, the demi-human warned Dilluk to be careful. Just then, the demi-human apologized to Akudu for keeping him there longer, but Dilluk didn't mind. In fact, he thanked the demi-human for the information he had shared. The demi-human then told Dilluk to leave the liberation of Roses' other servants to them. As Dilluk left, the demi-human told him that a lord like him was truly a blessing to Tenma. Dilluk said he was only doing what he had to, whether it was for Roses or Tenma. He then promised the demi-humans that he would protect them and their land. Moved, the demi-humans told Dilluk they were counting on him. At present, Dilluk rode on the Red Tiger's back. He thought that if they lost, the incident would be treated as a mere territorial dispute between domains, and Akudu's misdeeds would be swept under the rug. For their sake, and to protect Tenma village, Akudu's army had to be stopped at all costs. The Red Tiger agreed, reassuring Dilluk that as long as he could run, he'd be fine with anything. Dilluk thanked him, and they hurried back to Tenma. Meanwhile, in Tenma village, the demi-humans slowly made their way to safety. Many of the demolitians reunited with their families, while the villagers provided food and aid to the injured. Cindy oversaw the arrangements and felt relieved seeing everyone had made it into the village. Just then, Alice called out to Cindy and hugged her tightly. She said it felt like it had been a while since they last met, and she was beyond glad that everything was okay. However, she could still feel the chaos in the air. Cindy's expression turned serious, confirming Alice's feeling. At that moment, White Dragon arrived, carrying Carrot and Kororo on his back. Cindy smiled, relieved that they were safe, and urged the girls to regroup and share information. Soon after, they gathered to give updates. Cindy noted that the demi-humans heading to Roses had been stopped. Carrot confirmed this, saying that those people had also been guided to the village. Meanwhile, White Dragon gazed at the sky. The presence he sensed felt close, and he supposed many had noticed it. From Rosas, new soldiers were heading toward Tenma, and it seemed he and his companions would have to guard the village in the master's absence. Dodoria appeared alarmed, asking if Dilluk had defeated Akudu. Carrot replied that he had likely been sent away before the conclusion. She speculated that the enemy planned to use the battle as a distraction to capture Tenma. Dodoria was furious, saying Akudu and his forces were filthy to the very end. Carrot said that in any case, she had no choice but to fight. Even if someone told her she lost, she wouldn't believe it. At that moment, some demi-humans approached the group, saying they had heard their story. They swore to help defend the village, vowing not to let the forces of Roses have their way any longer. Kororo smiled, saying she was counting on them. The leader of the Kuma Bears also remarked that they had been training for this very day. Dororo also pledged to help defend Tenma, promising to reach out to some of his companions. The rest of the spirits voiced their support for the plan, and together they swore to protect Tenma. Meanwhile, the forces of Roses drew closer to the Tenma domain. One of the soldiers expressed disbelief that they were being ordered to advance, but the commander explained that it was necessary for security, a form of insurance. He was confident that Akudu wouldn't lose to such a pathetic village, and believed they could easily overtake it. Just then, they noticed the road was getting narrower by the minute. To their surprise, fences had been erected ahead, which irritated the soldiers. When asked what to do, the commander instructed those who could use magic to destroy the fences, then ordered the others to dismount and proceed on foot from there. After destroying the barrier, they encountered yet another problem. The grass was too tall, which further annoyed the commander. As he pushed through the tall grass, he caught sight of the majestic forest fortress built by Tenma. He was stunned, noting that there wasn't supposed to be a fortress there. From atop the fortress, Carrot smirked, saying this reaction was exactly what she expected, and she didn't feel the least bit sorry. Cindy then remarked that building the fortress close to Roses had been the right move. The people of Tenma were fired up, shouting that they were ready to defend their village. Meanwhile, the Roses commander reminded his men not to panic. He was reassured by the fact that Tenma's forces didn't even number 20. As the enemy advanced, Cindy warned her people to prepare for battle. Just as the soldiers from Roses charged toward Tenma, holes suddenly opened in the ground, swallowing them up without warning. Seeing this, Carrot proudly noted that her traps had worked perfectly. Still, the Rosa's commander urged his men not to waver, reminding them that they held the numerical advantage. Elsewhere on the battlefield, one of the Demolitians was filled with rage, believing this was his chance to avenge his people. He screamed at the enemy soldiers to come at him. As they attacked, the soldiers were stunned to see the Demolition wielding an unbreakable iron sword. He swiftly defeated those who came at him, grinning as he realized that Tenma's weapons were truly one of a kind. Meanwhile, a Rosa soldier mocked the Kuma bear, taunting him for not wielding a weapon in battle. But as the soldier charged, the Kuma bear effortlessly deflected the sword with his bare hands, snapping the soldier's wrist in the process. Bro trained his whole life to get folded in 3 seconds. As the fight raged on, Dodoria observed that both the Demolition tribe and the Kuma bears possessed incredible strength. His companion smirked, asking if they should also show what they were made of. Dodoria put on his game face, cursing the Rosa soldiers for interfering with the village's peace. Without hesitation, he began pummeling them, reducing them to a pulp. He and his crew demonstrated their skills, taking down multiple soldiers with ease. As the enemy groaned in pain, Dodoria proudly declared that the former Wyvern pirate gang had finally caused a ruckus again, something they hadn't done in a long time. Meanwhile, as the Rosa's commander watched his forces crumble, he questioned what was up with this village. He screamed at his soldiers, demanding to know what they were hesitating for, and urged them to press forward. One of his trusted men stammered, admitting he couldn't hold on any longer. The commander then remembered his mages, his final line of defense. Just then, Rosas's cavalry arrived in the distance to join the battle. The cavalry leader angrily demanded to know what was going on, but the commander didn't have time to explain. Instead, he yelled at them for arriving late and ordered them to prepare to destroy the fortress with magic. The mages began casting spells, launching their attacks toward the fortress. But out of nowhere, White Dragon appeared. The moment they saw him, the mages broke into a cold sweat. White Dragon unleashed a powerful surge of fire, scattering the mages with ease. He smirked, reminding them that their magic was useless. Meanwhile, the commander couldn't understand how the Tenma forces had seemingly endless power. Still, he remained determined, believing that, in a battle of endurance, their numbers could eventually overwhelm the enemy. Elsewhere, Cindy noticed that the Rosa soldiers were falling back slightly. She figured it was part of a strategy, waiting for Tenma's magic to run dry. However, Carrot reassured her that the plan was useless. Just then, Alice approached them with a tray of delicacies. She told the girls that everyone had already eaten their magic recovery rations, so their forces were fully recharged. While everyone was panicking, Alice was having a bake sale. Back on the battlefield, the Rosa's commander was furious. He couldn't believe that Tenma's forces showed no sign of running out of magic. Enraged, he ordered his men to charge and force a breakthrough. One of the soldiers rushed forward, targeting Bulk to execute the plan, but Bulk was unimpressed. Scoffing at the soldier's reckless charge, he swung his sword without breaking a sweat, easily striking him down. Watching the scene unfold, the commander called his soldiers a bunch of fools. He clenched his teeth, enraged by the fact that he was losing, and to demi-humans no less. It was unacceptable for noblemen like him to be defeated by them. Fueled by anger, he charged toward Kororo, aiming to strike her down with his blade. Cindy saw what was happening and quickly shouted a warning. In a flash, Kororo was on the ground, now in her human form. Her transformation threw off the commander's aim, saving her from the fatal blow. Furious that he missed, he wasn't about to give up. He declared that Kororo would regret defying humans even in the afterlife. Kororo was disgusted, so she told him he was being ridiculous. Even if she were to disappear, her friends would carry on her will. Just then, one of the Demolitians intervened to save Kororo. This only enraged the commander further. He swung his sword, declaring that these insolent inferior species would pay. Everyone else was too caught up in their own battles to stop him. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, the commander was suddenly sent flying into the air. Dilluk had struck him, saving Kororo at the last second. The forces of Tenma were thrilled to see that their lord had joined them. Meanwhile, the Rosa's commander finally came face to face with the one they called Dilluk Ravelo. Dilluk addressed the Rosa's soldiers directly. As the lord, he commanded them to withdraw from Tenma territory. He stated that the battle no longer had any meaning, as Akudu had already been captured. The commander stood in disbelief, insisting that Akudu had invested heavily in strengthening their military power. But he wasn't backing down. Drawing his sword, the commander declared he refused to believe that Rosas's elite army could lose to such a weak territory. Hearing this, Dilluk readied himself to fight, calmly expressing his hope that the man would reconsider. Then the commander lunged forward, shouting that he would crush Tenma and claim it for himself. But in a flash, Dilluk moved past him. So fast, the commander didn't even see it happen. Suddenly, Dilluk appeared behind him, his blade at the commander's neck. With a cold tone, Dilluk issued one final warning: to withdraw the Rosa's army. The commander broke out in a cold sweat. Realizing he was defeated, he raised his arms and ordered his men to retreat. When they didn't respond immediately, he shouted the command again, this time with fury. As the Rosa's soldiers pulled back, Dilluk turned to his comrades and congratulated them on a job well done. The Tenma forces erupted in joy, celebrating their hard-earned victory. While the others celebrated, Dodora approached Dilluk, asking if he was sure it was okay not to chase the retreating soldiers. Dilluk replied that the difference in strength was clear, but with Akudu gone, they likely wouldn't make any more moves. Dodora chuckled, noting that Dilluk hadn't changed at all. Meanwhile, the demolition who had saved Kororo asked if she was all right. She reassured him that she was. Then Dilluk approached her, expressing his relief that she was safe. Kororo apologized for being a burden, believing she had caused him trouble. However, Dilluk simply said that helping a comrade was natural, and he was grateful she had fought beside him. Kororo was left speechless, touched by his words. Dilluk then said they had to return to the village quickly so Kororo could reunite with her grandfather. The demolition added that the chief was indeed in the village. Soon, they arrived back in Tenma village. There, Kororo finally reunited with her grandfather, embracing him tightly. With tears in their eyes, they expressed how happy they were that the other was safe. Kororo then asked if her mother was with him, but the chief replied that she was probably still in Rosa's with the other demi-humans. By now, they should be free. As Dilluk watched them, he expressed his gratitude to the demolitions. If it weren't for their help, Tenma wouldn't have won the war. The chief then turned to Kororo, praising her for fighting well. She was his pride, as well as the entire clan's. However, Kororo humbly admitted she hadn't done it alone. She confessed she was once unable to believe in anything or make a difference, but everything changed when she came to Tenma. She never thought she'd call a human her comrade and be happy about it. She turned to Dilluk, thanking him and saying how glad she was that she could trust him. The chief then offered to repay the favor. If there was anything Dilluk ever needed, he only had to ask. Dilluk replied that his only wish was to protect the land and everyone who lived in it. If their home was ever threatened again, they should call on him. Kororo agreed, saying they should also unite as a clan and rebuild. With that, she and Dilluk shook hands, promising to see each other again. A few days later, the people of the Demolition tribe and other demi-humans returned to their original homes. Kororo was finally reunited with her mother. Meanwhile, the town of Rosa still had a long way to go in terms of recovery. Because of that, Dilluk was currently acting as their lord. He and his companions were busy dealing with the aftermath of the battle, but it seemed it would take a while longer to fully rebuild. As they cleaned up the forest, Cindy reassured Dilluk that the situation was understandable, given how large the battle had been. Still, with everyone pitching in to repair the damage, she was confident they'd be done in no time. The Demolition tribe's village had already made significant progress, something Cindy expected, especially with the dwarves involved in the repairs. However, whenever she thought about Akudu, Cindy couldn't help but get angry. Hearing that, Dilluk mentioned that Akudu's trial would be taking place soon. He assured her that the country would judge him for his crimes. For now, they just needed to focus on what they could do. Cindy smiled and agreed. Just then, Dilluk said that since the path was narrow from here, they should split up and take turns. He would check deeper inside, while Cindy would handle the remaining area. As Dilluk walked further into the forest to retrieve some arrows, he realized he had wandered too far. Suddenly, he was struck by the beauty of the forest. He guessed this was the deepest part of the White Wolf Forest. Touching a nearby tree, he was amazed by how untouched the area was despite the battle. Then a mysterious voice called out to him, catching him off guard. He sensed it coming from even deeper within the forest. To his shock, a giant wolf spirit appeared before him. The wolf asked if he was the one who had come to protect the forest once again. Dilluk's eyes widened in disbelief. Had he truly come face to face with the legendary White Wolf? The White Wolf didn't think anyone still called him by that name. Unu was also known as Fenrir, the White Wolf. Dilluk stood in disbelief, realizing that the god worshipped by the Demolition tribe actually existed. He then asked why the White Wolf was the divine beast of this area. The White Wolf explained that he no longer had the power to be called Unu. Even this single forest they stood in was beyond his protection now, showing just how much he had declined. Suddenly, the White Wolf bowed before Dilluk, thanking him for protecting the forest in his place. Flustered, Dilluk urged the majestic beast to rise. He explained that he too had left scars on the forest because of the battle. The White Wolf acknowledged that, but said a victory without scars was impossible. Then the White Wolf suggested they inspect the forest together. As they walked, Dilluk showed the White Wolf an area deeply damaged by the battle. Seeing the scars left behind, the White Wolf agreed that it was indeed terrible. The White Wolf then spoke of a strength that Unu had protected for moments like this. Dilluk was confused, so the White Wolf showed him a necklace, which was the strength Unu had wanted to pass down. Dilluk asked if it was a magic stone, so the White Wolf explained that it wasn't just a magic stone, it was a treasure handed down through generations of forest rulers. When infused with magic, its power could be unlocked. And now, the White Wolf said that Dilluk's magic was worthy of awakening it. Dilluk was stunned, realizing that the treasure the forest guardian had protected for generations was being entrusted to him. The White Wolf told him he would understand its true meaning once he touched the magic stone. Then the White Wolf handed the stone to Dilluk and he touched it carefully. Just then the stone separated from the necklace, shocking Dilluk. The magic stone seemed to act on its own, rising into the sky above them. Suddenly, a powerful ray of light burst from the stone, shining down on all living creatures in the forest. Plants began to sprout and grow, astonishing the villagers from Tenma. The White Wolf was overjoyed, exclaiming that the forest had been reborn. He explained that the magic stone responded to the nature of the forest, and only those recognized as the master of the White Wolf Forest could wield it. Dilluk was stunned, asking if that meant he was now the master of the White Wolf Forest. The White Wolf replied that it may seem surreal, but the forest had chosen Dilluk. He was worthy of inheriting the magic stone and its power. Even though Unu no longer had the magic to infuse into the stone, the White Wolf promised to watch over Dilluk for a long time. He said he was counting on him, then he vanished into thin air. Dilluk clutched the stone in his hand, determined to uphold his responsibilities. The next day, everyone in Tenma celebrated their victory. Cindy raised a toast to Dilluk, admitting that it might seem a bit presumptuous of her. She then said they were only able to win the battle thanks to everyone's combined strength. That day was for celebrating their triumph. Everyone then lifted their cups into the air and cheered together. As the celebration continued, Kororo approached Dilluk, thanking him for inviting her. Dilluk welcomed her warmly and added that he was grateful to her tribe and the rest of the demi-humans. He believed this was a victory they had all achieved together. Kororo smiled, saying he was just the same as always. Then she remarked that everyone else should be thanking him instead. Right on cue, the demi-humans joined in, agreeing that no matter how much they tried to express their gratitude, it would never be enough. One of the elves spoke up, saying he would never forget the favor Dilluk had done for him. They then promised that if anything ever happened to Tenma village, they would come without hesitation and help however they could. Overwhelmed, Dilluk thanked everyone. Overhearing the others praising Dilluk for his heroic deeds, the other demi-humans eagerly joined the conversation. As they got too caught up in it, they separated themselves from Dilluk and Kororo, chatting excitedly about the time Dilluk saved them from brainwashing. Kororo chuckled and told Dilluk that she would go listen to the stories of his bravery. Jokingly, she added that it would be a shame to monopolize the leading role. Dilluk laughed, wishing her a good time. As the celebration continued, everyone kept trying to pour alcohol into Dilluk's cup, but he only wanted to drink water. Bro's too holy for this world. Eventually, Dilluk wandered over to the well where Cindy found him. She asked if something was wrong and mentioned that everyone was looking for him. Dilluk hesitated, saying that what he was about to say might be a little embarrassing. Then he asked if she would join him for a little break from the crowd. Cindy's eyes sparkled and she happily agreed. That night, they went deep into the forest, gazing up at the stars above. Dilluk commented that the starry sky of Tenma was far more beautiful than that of the royal capital. He then reflected on how he had been exiled and brought to Tenma. After everything that had happened, he realized it had been a good thing. It allowed him to come here and meet Cindy and everyone else. Cindy smiled warmly, saying she felt the same way. She was grateful to have come to this era and was beyond glad to have met Dilluk. To her, the stars looked the most beautiful when she was with him. Girls really out here farming loyalty points. Just then, Cindy spotted a shooting star. Dilluk sighed, disappointed that he missed it. But Cindy reassured him that it might still work if he made a wish. With that, Dilluk closed his eyes and wished for a world where everyone could live in peace. When he asked Cindy what she wished for, she only smiled mischievously and said it was a secret. Not long after, the two decided to return to Tenma. A few days later, people gathered at the kingdom's court. It was announced that a trial would be held for the Class A criminal, Akudu Higgins, along with his accomplice, Doltlin. Doltlin was sentenced to life imprisonment for the inhumane use of his magical abilities. However, he seemed unfazed by the sentence, claiming it was an insult to keep him alive. Akudu, on the other hand, was found guilty of illegally dominating territory and its people. He had also committed discriminatory acts against demi-humans, crimes punishable by severe penalties. He was stripped of his title as Lord of Roses and sentenced to exile. Enraged, Akudu shouted at the judge, demanding if they even knew who he was. He claimed to be the son of the prestigious Higgins family, but in court that held no weight. He was told to shut up, as the charges and punishment had already been approved by his own father. The outcome of the trial was final, equivalent to the king's own judgment. It could not be overturned. And so the battle over Rosas came to an end. By national decree, Rosas officially became a territory of Tenma, now placed under Dilluk's jurisdiction. One day, Dilluk and Bulk arrived in Rosas for an inspection. As they entered the town, Bulk asked if it was dangerous, as Dilluk had asked him to come. Dilluk wasn't sure, but he thought it was better to be safe than sorry. He told Bulk he would trust him to handle the patrol alone, and Bulk confidently replied that it would be an easy task. With that, Dilluk left the inspection to him and continued his own count. As Dilluk walked through the town, he noticed that Rosas looked like a regular town at first glance. However, knowing that it had been under Adu's control for a long time, he knew better than to let his guard down. Just as expected, some suspicious people had managed to sneak in. Suddenly, he heard a voice coming from an alleyway, ordering someone to come out. There he saw a buff man taunting a young boy, calling him a brat and accusing him of stealing his property. The sight of this made Dilluk furious. The man asked the boy if he brought the gem just as he was instructed. The boy tensed up and apologized in advance. Furious, the man snapped, saying a brat's apology wasn't worth a single penny. He asked if the boy came empty-handed, then sneered, wondering how the kid planned to pay for his failure. As the man cornered the boy, Dilluk stood at a distance, silently watching everything unfold. Before the situation could escalate, Dilluk stepped in to protect the boy, asking the man what he thought he was doing. The man looked annoyed and asked who Dilluk was supposed to be. Dilluk admitted he didn't know the full story, but reminded the man that he was threatening a literal child. The man smirked, asking why he was the one getting blamed when someone else broke a promise with him. He explained that the town was their business territory and that he had entrusted the kid with an errand. The boy apologized, admitting that he couldn't bring himself to steal. Dilluk looked confused, so the kid explained that he had been told to steal jewels. In Rosas, everything was scarce, so anything could be sold easily. Dilluk was shocked, realizing the town had basically become a thieves' market. Suddenly, the buff man drew his dagger, saying that if the boy couldn't deliver the goods, he'd take his body instead. Dilluk immediately jumped into action, yelling at the boy to get down. As the man lunged, Dilluk slid underneath, tripping him in the process. He called out to the kid, urging him to run, but they soon found the alley was blocked off by the man's companions. The men were furious that Dilluk was taking the kid away. They warned him that it would be a problem if anyone interfered with their business. Dilluk realized he was surrounded and fighting while protecting the boy would be difficult. However, he was determined to buy time. Dilluk turned to the kid with a calm smile and told him to hold on tight. Then he leapt from the ground and unleashed the Ravello-style, full-moon rotating sword dance. Flames erupted around him, leaving the men stunned. They realized too late that they were dealing with a skill user. Meanwhile, Bulk caught sight of the flames in the sky. Recognizing it as a sign of trouble, he rushed in the direction of the battle and soon came face to face with the thugs. Upon seeing him, the thugs immediately suspected that this old man was with Dilluk. Bulk smirked, declaring that punishing them was his duty and understanding. Then, without hesitation, he drew his sword and easily took them down. As he walked away, Bulk reassured the men that the blows were non-lethal. Dilluk was relieved to see Bulk, admitting he was worried he wouldn't make it. He thanked the old man and said that now things would be resolved quickly. As Dilluk let the boy off his back, he quickly unleashed the Ravello-style Moonshadow Slash, taking out the remaining thugs in an instant. The kid was amazed by how fast it was over. Bulk then tied up the defeated thugs and asked who they were. He introduced Dilluk as the Lord of Tenma and Rosas. The thug leader was shocked to realize he had gone up against the Lord himself, and asked if Akudu had been replaced. Bulk confirmed it, adding that they would no longer be allowed to stir up trouble in this land. Still, the thugs remained defiant, claiming that capturing them wouldn't change anything. Meanwhile, Dilluk turned to the boy and asked for his name. The boy replied that he was Louis. Dilluk then asked him to explain the transaction he had with the thugs. Louis hesitated but eventually admitted that his mother was bedridden with a serious illness. The town pharmacist had said there was no cure, but the thug leader promised him a powerful potion if he agreed to work for them. Dilluk frowned at the thought. A miracle potion like that couldn't possibly exist. The thugs had likely planned to deceive the boy from the start. Just then, Bulk approached. Dilluk said he couldn't ignore someone in need. Though he had no medical knowledge himself, he believed another heroic spirit might. Thanks to the battle with Akudu and the recent expansion of their territory, Dilluk had accumulated enough points to guarantee his next summon. He was confident that the right heroic spirit would come, one who could save Louis's mother. With that, Dilluk left the rest to Bulk and followed Louis to his home. Before long, they arrived. Louis led Dilluk inside where his mother lay bedridden. He explained that she was in constant pain and couldn't even get up. With tears in his eyes, he asked Dilluk if he could really help her. Dilluk nodded, saying he would need some space to summon a new heroic spirit. He began to channel his power, stunning Louis with the display. Using the ancient summoning skill, a heroic spirit appeared. Her name was Apollo. Dilluk smiled at the sight of her while Louis was a bit creeped out by how suddenly she appeared. Dilluk was about to explain the situation, but Apollo spoke first. She already understood. Louis asked for an explanation, but Apollo hushed him, saying she needed silence to begin the examination. She cast her scanning magic, analyzing Louis's mother's condition. The cause, she explained, was rooted in the blood. an advanced stage of malnutrition. With the diagnosis complete, Apollo moved forward with the treatment. With a wave of her magic, Louis's mother slowly woke up, now healed. Louis immediately hugged her, overwhelmed with joy. Dilluk and Apollo both smiled at the touching scene. Hospitals after Apollo showed up. "Guess I'll close." Apollo then greeted Dilluk, revealing that she used to work as a healer in ancient Tenma. Dilluk thanked her, and she responded that she was honored. It felt good to use her powers again for the sake of humanity. Curious, Dilluk asked to hear more about her abilities, and Apollo agreed. She explained that the first step was understanding the root cause of an illness or injury. The scan she had used was a magic-based diagnostic that allowed her to detect underlying issues. After identifying the cause, she applied healing magic. The treatment could involve removing viruses, stitching damaged tissues, or restoring lost nutrients. In cases where a new virus couldn't be identified, she would perform symptomatic treatment instead. Dilluk was surprised that such methods were even possible. Apollo then said that a healer could only treat what they understood, so she studied every single day. It was her mission to save as many lives as she could, even if she had to do it alone. That mission would never change, no matter how much the times shifted. Dilluk smiled warmly, acknowledging that Apollo's healing powers were truly amazing. Just then, Louis's mother expressed her gratitude. Although she didn't have any money, she wanted to thank them somehow. Apollo simply replied that there was no need, as she had already fulfilled her duty. Dilluk, on the other hand, only asked to hear about the recent situation in Rosas. Louis's mother quickly explained that after Akudu took over as lord, life for everyone became harder. The prices of goods and taxes went up, and the town had seen an increase in suspicious peddlers. As Dilluk listened, he became convinced it was true, especially thinking back to the bandits he had encountered. Under Akudu's governance, protection money was collected from those originally doing business in Rosas, forcing many shops to reluctantly shut down. She then mentioned that the number of people coughing had suddenly increased. It was mostly the merchants who fell ill, and she guessed they were simply overworked. However, this made Dilluk suspicious. Why were only the merchants getting sick? Apollo grew worried too, noting that if it were an epidemic, they needed to investigate the cause immediately. Dilluk asked if Apollo's scans had picked up anything, but Apollo answered that Louis's mother showed no symptoms of coughing, so it was probably unrelated. Still, Apollo suspected that stolen goods sold on the black market might be the cause of the cough epidemic. It was clear the town's situation was far worse than they expected. Not long after, Dilluk and Apollo excused themselves. Louis and his mother thanked them warmly, while Apollo reminded them to take care of themselves. Louis then called out, asking them to come back soon. As Dilluk and Apollo walked away, Apollo asked if Dilluk was worried. He admitted he was, and insisted they stay a while longer to investigate. Dilluk was determined to find out what was really happening to this town. Not too long ago, Dilluk and Bulk inspected the newly governed territory of Rosas. Together with his new ally, Apollo, they set out to save the ill mother of a boy named Louis. Thanks to Apollo's healing skill, they were able to heal her. However, the ominous rumors surrounding the town concerned Dilluk, so he decided to stay for a while to resolve these strange occurrences. Soon after, Dilluk joined his companions at the Lord's Manor in Rosas, where he was immediately greeted by Cindy. Cindy asked about the state of the town, and Dilluk replied that compared to before, the number of black market fences had significantly decreased. Even so, the townspeople's movement was still scarce, and it seemed like they remained on guard. Dilluk speculated that it would take time to truly resolve the problem. Hearing this saddened Cindy, but she found some reassurance in the fact that the Kuma Bears and Dodoria were taking care of Tenma village while they were in Rosas. Still, it didn't seem like they would be able to join them anytime soon. Just then, Cindy showcased the current state of the mansion, which impressed Dilluk. He expressed his gratitude, but Cindy mentioned that Apollo should also be credited for helping her. Apollo chimed in, noting that because of Cindy's excessive attention to detail with the furniture, progress had been delayed a bit. Cindy argued that she wasn't being excessive, but Apollo didn't agree with her. The two were also troubled about the decorations, torn between choosing a lounging cat or some flowers. They wondered if elaborate decorations were even necessary. But in any case, Cindy's furniture was top-notch when it came to functionality. With that, they decided to finish the rest quickly. Cindy gushed over Apollo for letting her decorate, but Apollo didn't appreciate the physical contact as much. Seeing them together made Dilluk smile, realizing that Apollo was starting to ease in with the others. Dilluk thought it was about time for Alice and the others to return. Sure enough, Alice, Carrot, and Bulk arrived shortly after, greeting Dilluk and the rest of the group. Dilluk noticed that Alice looked a little distraught and asked what had happened. She explained that they weren't able to procure any ingredients in town. Dilluk then asked what the ingredients were for, and Alice frantically apologized, saying the vendors had turned them away and refused to sell to outsiders. It didn't help that the ingredients they brought from Tenma were already gone. With sadness in her eyes, she apologized for not being able to help. Cindy tried to comfort her, saying it wasn't her fault. Carrot also noted that once the town's situation improved, things like this would be resolved. Apollo agreed with Carrot's sentiments. Dilluk added that just learning about the current state of the town was helpful enough, and thanked Alice for her efforts. Carrot speculated that the townspeople were simply on guard against outsiders. The number of goods for sale was also very limited. Bulk agreed, noting that there were very few people in town, which explained the low stocks. Just then, Dilluk suggested looking for a restaurant or tavern that catered to outsiders like them. Alice got excited, eager to try the food in Rosa's. Cindy chuckled at her expression, glad to see her feeling a bit better. With that, the group set off to find a place to eat. As they moved through town, Cindy was determined to find an establishment for her companions, but as they looked around, it felt like they were walking through a ghost town. Apollo commented that under these conditions, finding an open shop seemed impossible. Alice, however, was lost in thought, insisting that she could smell various dishes coming from nearby. Following the scent, she led the group until they eventually found themselves in front of an establishment. There, they found a woman running the establishment on her own. She welcomed Dilluk and his companions warmly, telling them to sit wherever they liked. Not long after, she served the group her best dishes, which made their mouths water. Dilluk's eyes lit up as he tasted the food, and so did everyone else's. Alice, meanwhile, was geeking out over the yakitori. The spiciness of the sansho perfectly enhanced the rich aroma of the charcoal, creating a balanced flavor. She also pointed out how incredible the rosemary and thyme-infused pork smelled. All of this made her wonder what the secret ingredient could be. Hearing their reactions, the woman chuckled and said they were a funny bunch. She then asked if they were outsiders and where they came from. Dilluk replied that he came to this town from a nearby village. The woman commented that he seemed like a bit of a materialist, guessing that he hadn't been able to do proper shopping in town. She noted that the shopping districts in the area probably weren't operating anymore. Dilluk was surprised to hear that the entire shopping district had collapsed, which made him think that the number of people living in the village must also be quite low. Just then, the woman, who introduced herself as Renee, revealed that she was the president of the shopping district. She said she wanted to do something about the situation, but lacked both the funds and the strategy to draw in more customers. Recently, with the change in leadership, unlawful tax collections had stopped. However, Rosa's already had a bad reputation for being expensive and dangerous. Once the customers had left, they didn't come back easily, and the few who did return were usually just suspicious outsiders. That was the unfortunate fate now facing business owners and Rosa's. Alice was saddened by this truth, especially since Renee's cooking was genuinely delicious. Renee tried to cheer her up, saying she was just glad they enjoyed the food. Alice then asked if there was anything she could do, which caught Dilluk by surprise. She explained that if restaurant businesses began to thrive, the entire town would naturally become more lively. She wanted to help increase the number of people in town and revitalize the economy. Apollo added that the number of black market dealers had been decreasing, and the town's safety was slowly being restored. Cindy, meanwhile, was deep in thought, wondering how they could draw people back to Rosa's. Dilluk, however, had something else in mind. He figured he should head to the shopping district first. He then turned to Alice and told her that she might be the key to saving it. A few days later, everyone was hard at work in Rosa's shopping district. Apollo informed the group that the supply preparations were complete, while Carrot added that the sign installation was finally done. Cindy chimed in as well, saying she had finished training the plates. As for Alice, she announced that she had completed the last item, showcasing Rosa's cuisine, taught to her directly by the president herself. Carrot noticed how much food she had prepared. Alice nodded, admitting she made a lot, and declared that she was determined to make this mission a success. She believed her food cart could help revitalize Rosa's. Alice had done extensive research for this day. Carrot then recalled how the president had purchased a huge amount from Alice's store. Alice added that the people of the shopping street had also given their approval. Just then, two men approached the food cart, saying they were sent by the president. They seemed doubtful that an outsider like Alice could recreate Rosa's signature flavors. But the moment they tasted the food, their skepticism vanished. One of them remarked that it was incredibly delicious, while the other said it tasted just like the president's cooking. Right after, Renee thanked Alice for her help and told her that she would leave the shopping district in her hands. Alice was fired up, confident that her cooking could bring customers back to Rosa's. Dilluk then appeared, praising everyone for their hard work on the preparations. Cindy couldn't help but gush over Dilluk's appearance and admitted she didn't expect him to come up with the strategy they used. Apollo was equally impressed by Dilluk's planning. Dilluk had proposed the idea of giving out free samples at the food stall. That way, customers could discover a dish they liked and purchase it in any quantity at an affordable price. It was a bold strategy, focusing on small profits through high-volume sales. Cindy was moved to tears, agreeing wholeheartedly with the plan. but Dilluk insisted that the credit should go to Alice's cooking. He then excused himself to patrol the area with White Dragon and reassured everyone that Bulk would handle the ground patrols. With that, the team officially launched the food cart. However, hours passed and still no one was coming to their food cart. Cindy was furious, completely confused about why this was happening. Alice began to spiral, paranoid that her cooking must be terrible. Carrot tried to calm her down, insisting that it was all in her head. Apollo added that it seemed like the food cart wasn't even being noticed. Just then, Carrot regretted not making the sign bigger, while Apollo was baffled because she had already posted flyers all over town. Frustrated, Cindy threw a fit. If the cart didn't catch their eyes, then surely the scent of the food should have drawn them in. If only the townspeople could smell what they'd cooked. Just then, the wind shifted. Cindy fell silent as a breeze began to sweep through the district, carrying the aroma of their dishes down the empty streets. They looked up and there he was, Dilluk, soaring above on White Dragon, guiding the wind in their favor. The sight made Alice and Cindy light up with hope. Bro's a real-life Prince Charming. The scent spread fast. All across town, heads turned as people caught a whiff of something irresistible. White Dragon watched the reaction unfold, remarking that it seemed to be working. Hearing this, Dilluk let out a breath of relief. He knew there wasn't much he could do, but he desperately wanted Alice's efforts to be rewarded. Not long after, people trickled in, drawn by the scent. Their curiosity turned to surprise the moment they saw the cart. Cindy didn't hold back, her energy explosive as she greeted the customers. She hyped the food with confidence, pushed the free samples, and practically begged them to give it a shot. The crowd took a chance on Alice's cooking, and as expected, they were blown away. One customer broke the silence, insisting the free sample wasn't nearly enough. Alice didn't hesitate, and she offered full servings for just 100 pel each. The price shocked them because it was too good to pass up. The customers ordered 2 servings at the spot, and Alice beamed with joy as she quickly got to work. It didn't take long for the shopping district to buzz with excitement, as more people from Rosa's gathered around the cart, eager to see what the commotion was about. Dilluk joined them soon after, telling Cindy that the mission was a success. Cindy quickly thanked Dilluk and White Dragon for their support, then she gave credit where it was due. Alice had worked hard for this moment. Dilluk agreed, noting that it had been a long time since he'd seen her so full of life. Without hesitation, he said he'd be helping from now on. Cindy couldn't help but chuckle, as having him around would seem like having the strength of 100 people. As the day went on, more and more people gathered at the food cart. In no time, everything was sold out, leaving Renee in utter disbelief. So much money had come in from just a single day of sales that she couldn't help but question who these people really were. At that moment, Dilluk stepped forward and introduced himself as the new Lord of Rosa's. Renee was taken aback, as she hadn't expected him to be the Lord himself. Dilluk then told her to use the earnings to help revitalize the shopping district. Though hesitant at first, Renee accepted his generous offer. Shortly after, Alice approached Renee and thanked her, saying she was the reason behind the stall's success. Renee was just about to return the gratitude when she suddenly broke into a cough. The sound immediately alarmed Apollo. It was all too familiar. Apollo heard that cough and locked in like it's Grey's Anatomy. Renee quickly apologized, brushing it off, but Apollo grew concerned and insisted on examining her. While Apollo began her scan, Dilluk created a bed for Renee to rest on. Renee was confused, joking that they were overreacting to a simple cough. But then, Apollo's scanning magic finished and the results were unsettling. The source of the cough couldn't be identified. The room fell into silence, tension growing as the news sank in. Apollo turned to Renee and gently asked if anything came to mind that might explain it. Renee paused, clearly uneasy before finally speaking. She mentioned an old story, one whispered among merchants. Rumors that only merchants ever made these coughs. There had always been talk about the Merchant Guild. Dilluk grew curious about the Merchant Guild, prompting Renee to explain everything she knew. There were old stories about an underground faction, an organization secretly formed by the upper ranks of the guild to indulge their own desires. The revelation left Dilluk stunned. He remembered hearing about a lawless guild involved in substandard stolen and illegal goods. They would buy and sell anything regardless of its origin. Renee went on to say that a proper guild was meant to oversee the quality of products, to inspect and monitor what passed through its system. But the Black Market Guild operated in the shadows, deliberately avoiding monitoring and conducting transactions on their own terms. Merchants like Renee weren't even allowed to question where the goods came from. It was possible that some troublesome products had slipped in from somewhere unknown. This made Dilluk wonder if a particular item might have caused the cough. Still, Renee reminded him that no solid evidence existed. It was only a possibility that she knew about. She added that the current guildmaster remained a complete mystery. Ever since his arrival in Rosa's, even the guild members themselves didn't know what he was planning. Cindy inquired whether, as the Lord, Dilluk could investigate within the guild. Renee replied that it would be extremely difficult. At first glance, the guild appeared to be an ordinary merchant guild, and if the Lord were to intervene, everything would be concealed, ending any chance of uncovering the truth. In response, Apollo suggested that securing evidence was essential. After pondering the matter, Dilluk decided that an undercover investigation of the secret guild should be conducted. Although the others were clearly shocked by his suggestion, Dilluk acknowledged the challenge and emphasized the need to begin making the necessary preparations. Days later, Cindy used her alchemy to create cups outside the Lord's manor in Rosas. Reflecting on everyone's efforts in Rosas, she marveled at how amazing their work was. Although she felt she had not received the same praise from Dilluk as the others, she was determined to seize an opportunity to shine during the infiltration mission. Knowing she needed to polish her alchemy skills further, she confidently declared her desire to remain by Dilluk's side. She was devoted to Dilluk in sickness and in health, and she made sure to be present in both the town's reconstruction and in undercover investigations. At this point, Dilluk is like a saint to her. At that moment, Cindy noticed Dilluk speaking with Serge, the maple merchant. Serge expressed his honor in conducting business with Dilluk within Rosas' territory. Since Rosas served as a relay point between Serge's company and Tenma, increasing transactions was exactly what he had hoped for. However, Serge also felt a twinge of concern. Dilluk was not relying on the Merchant Guild of Rosas, but was instead doing business directly with the Maple Company. This observation reinforced his conviction that the rumors about the town's guild were true. Dilluk then asked Serge if he knew anything about the matter. Serge replied that it was a well-known story among merchants recently, that the Rosas Merchant Guild was involved in dangerous dealings. While he sympathized with the town's disarray under the previous administration, he could not deny that things had deteriorated to such an extent that the town now carried a bad reputation. Meanwhile, Dilluk formed his own speculations about the dangerous dealings and the tarnished reputation within the town. He then inquired if the blame could be placed on the underground guild. The mere suggestion alarmed Serge, but he quickly masked his concern by acting nonchalant. Serge made it clear that he was convinced illegal transactions were indeed taking place. These transactions were so underhanded that even the most basic standards of decency were abandoned. Despite a sharp decline in legitimate dealings, the fact that operations were continuing strongly suggested they were profiting from some form of illegal goods. This revelation led Dilluk to realize that infiltrating the guild to investigate further indeed held merit. Believing that infiltrating the guild directly was too bold, Serge suggested that Dilluk take the guild membership license exam instead. Dilluk was surprised to learn such an exam existed, prompting Serge to explain that it was mandatory for anyone wishing to enter the guild. Just then, Cindy came running toward them, eagerly insisting that she would take the exam too. She begged Serge to be her tutor, promising to reward him with a new magical tool, one that would be exclusively available at the Maple General Store. Serge quickly accepted her offer, and Cindy, full of energy, declared her determination to do her best. Later, in the bustling shopping district, Dilluk informed his companions that until the day of the infiltration, he and Bulk would continue patrolling the town. Meanwhile, Cindy focused on studying hard for the entrance exam with Serge's help. Carrot contributed to the town's reconstruction while also reinforcing its defenses. Alice kept the shopping district lively, while Apollo served as the temporary town doctor at her clinic. She also continued her investigation into the mysterious cough, something that once again reminded Dilluk of the unanswered questions surrounding its true cause. At Apollo's clinic, she informed a patient that he had only suffered from mild heat stroke. The man expressed his gratitude, and Apollo reminded him to stay hydrated. As the patient left, Dilluk entered the clinic and was greeted by Apollo. He asked about the townspeople's condition, and Apollo reported that many of her patients had been suffering from malnutrition and overwork, though the situation had improved significantly. This, she believed, was clear evidence that Rosas was recovering. Dilluk then brought up the mysterious cough, but Apollo admitted she still had no definitive answers. Their conversation was interrupted when another patient entered the clinic. The man appeared fatigued and expressed concern over a scraped knee. Dilluk offered to try healing it using Apollo's powers, to which she agreed. Kneeling before the man, Dilluk placed his hand over the injury and healed it swiftly. The man was thrilled to witness the incredible power he had only heard about. Then, somewhat guiltily, the man confessed that he hadn't simply tripped. In truth, he had witnessed a fight between two men arguing over a small bottle. When he tried to intervene, he was shoved to the ground, resulting in his injury. He speculated that the two were members of the mysterious guild. When asked about the bottle, the man said he had overheard one of them talking about drinking its contents, leading him to believe it might have been liquor or medicine. Whatever it was clearly valuable enough to fight over. There's a 98% chance it was a Baja Blast. With that, the man stood and excused himself, saying he had to return to work. Dilluk asked Apollo for her thoughts on the man's account. He noted that it was troubling, and there was a strong possibility that the orally taken substance was the cause of the cough. If it was something ingested, then it was definitely worth investigating further. On the day of the guild infiltration, Dilluk and Cindy disguised themselves as merchants. Cindy seemed a bit uneasy, wondering if she looked convincing. Dilluk assured her that she did look like a proper merchant. Cindy then admired Dilluk's appearance, saying he looked dashing. Eventually, they arrived at the merchant guild. There they were asked to present their licenses. Instead, Dilluk stated that he wished to obtain a new one. The man questioned if Dilluk truly intended to join the guild, pointing out how suspicious it was for someone to appear during such uncertain times. Dilluk replied that he was well aware of the current state of the town, and that was exactly why he wanted to support its revival. The man appeared intrigued by his response and told Dilluk to wait while preparations were made. Dilluk turned to Cindy and reminded her that they both had to give it their best. Soon the man called for them. It was time for the exam. Without delay, Dilluk and Cindy took the test. Not long after, they completed it, and the man instructed them to wait while he reviewed their answers. Cindy looked nervous, worried she hadn't passed, but Dilluk reminded her how much she had studied for this moment. Then the man returned and announced that both had passed. Cindy, in particular, had performed exceptionally well. He even remarked that it had been a long time since he'd seen scores that high, clearly flattering her. Dilluk chuckled quietly to himself, realizing there was no need to deliberately underperform to avoid suspicion. With that, the man handed them their licenses and officially welcomed them into the Rose's Merchant Guild. Dilluk expressed his gratitude, and Cindy promised to treasure the license for life. Suddenly, Dilluk informed the man that he wanted to proceed with a business discussion right away. The man was caught off guard by how sudden it was, but then again, it wasn't unheard of for new members to jump into transactions immediately. Dilluk explained that this was all for the revival of the guild, and not a single second should be wasted. He also pointed out that their products were favored by the Maple Trading Company, a major firm that had shown them support. That statement seemed to convince the man, and he promised to guide them inside the guild. The man explained that the guildmaster was currently unavailable. In his place, he introduced two men who would assist Dilluk and Cindy. One of them scoffed at how ambitious they were, jumping straight into business discussions right after taking the license exam. Dilluk, however, paid no attention to the remark and remained focused on pursuing the business deal. Soon after, Dilluk and Cindy presented the magical items they had created, which immediately piqued the men's interest. While Cindy handled the sales talk, Dilluk stayed alert. He was searching the room for anything that might serve as a clue, possibly linked to a backroom deal or even the cause of the persistent cough. That's when his gaze settled on a bottle tucked between the shelves. It looked like something that one would have to drink. Just then, one of the men noticed Dilluk's wandering eyes and asked if something had caught his attention. Dilluk quickly covered up, saying it was just a bad habit of his. Then one of the men admitted that their goods were quite impressive. Dilluk and Cindy offered to show more of their products. The man joked that it was going to be a long presentation, then instructed the receptionist to serve him his usual. In no time, a special black tea was brought out, a staple of the guild. Dilluk and Cindy were surprised to learn that this was what they meant by the usual. It turned out to be a signature product that the guild was currently promoting. They were even distributing it as a trial drink among guild members. This makes me skeptical about free samples now. Dilluk maintained a calm exterior, but internally he was stunned to learn that this black tea was being widely distributed within the guild. Without wasting time, he proposed a deal, offering the men samples of their magical tools in exchange for some of the black tea leaves. The men burst into laughter, curious about what made the tea so special in Dilluk's eyes. After all, he hadn't even tasted it himself. Dilluk then explained that he had heard about the tea's reputation from various merchants around town. According to them, once someone drank it, they could never forget the taste. The men were caught off guard by his words, now genuinely curious about what exactly Dilluk knew. Dilluk flashed a sinister look, claiming that there was some kind of medicine mixed into the tea leaves. The men tried to keep their composure, questioning why he would make such an irresponsible accusation. But Dilluk stood firm, pointing out that anyone could tell just by looking at the faces of those in the guild who had consumed the tea. He insisted he was no stranger to this kind of business, and there was no point trying to deceive him. The men stayed silent and Dilluk pressed on. From what he could tell, the current distribution of the tea leaves was still extremely limited, and now he asked them if they wanted to expand the business. The men were surprised by the sudden offer, reminding Dilluk that it wouldn't be as simple as he made it sound. But Dilluk continued, explaining that they needed to sell their magical tools to increase the circulation funds for the drugs. Each magical tool was traded with the Maple Trading Company at a price of 100,000 pel per item. One of the men was shocked to hear that a major trading company paid that much. Dilluk added that the Maple Trading Company's profits had been skyrocketing ever since they started handling their goods. about 3 times higher than before. This revelation stunned the men even more. One of them admitted there was certainly profit to be made, but still, he asked, what was Dilluk's real goal? Dilluk questioned why they were being so cautious when in truth they shared the same objective. Curious, one of the men pressed him to explain. Dilluk laid it out clearly. Their path to wealth was already settled. If they turned every person in this country into a drug addict, the craving for tea leaves would never stop. There was no more efficient way to make money. Dilluk promised to keep turning profits through magical tools while the men made theirs through the drugs. To him, it was a deal too good to ignore. One of the men admitted that Dilluk was quite the mystery, but the offer was too tempting to reject. It seemed to him that this fellow professional wasn't a liar. As for the formal transaction, he wanted to consult the guildmaster for approval, but at the same time, he didn't want to miss a golden opportunity and risk getting scolded later. With that, the men agreed to give Dilluk a jar filled with black tea leaves as a down payment for the deal. Dilluk suggested that they get along from now on, but the men simply replied that it was up to them. As he departed, Dilluk advised them to halt the distribution of tea leaves within the guild for the time being. After all, the one sniffing around might not necessarily be him. One of the men smirked, offering a sarcastic thanks for the advice. As Dilluk and Cindy approached the exit, the receptionist from earlier offered to escort them. While walking, the receptionist remarked that he was surprised the two men were siding with Dilluk. In response, Dilluk confidently explained that deceiving others was also a method of making money. The receptionist smiled, suggesting that someone like Dilluk would be a good fit for their guild. When Dilluk asked what he meant, the receptionist simply replied that it meant exactly what it sounded like. He continued, saying that poverty gnawed away at people's hearts. It drove them to deception, to trampling others underfoot, even to taking lives without hesitation. Even if the public order in town had improved, it was a different story in places where money moved. The receptionist then turned to Dilluk, stating that this guild was the very embodiment of Rosas's darkness. Dilluk fell silent for a moment. Then shifting the mood, he said he was quite interested in the guild, particularly in the kind of person the guildmaster might be. The receptionist admitted that he had never met the guildmaster. Only he was allowed access to the office and the reception room, and he heard that the guildmaster rarely appeared in public. Everything about him remained a mystery. Dilluk then brought up the tea leaves. The receptionist said they were important goods, and that was all he knew. Still, it was clear that this was one of the guild's most prioritized business ventures. Considering the scale, there weren't nearly enough people involved. He added that Dilluk might be called in on the day the import ship arrived. Dilluk reacted with excitement, thinking to himself that the drug imports came in through a seaport. The Black Market Guild didn't seem to have many members either. As they continued walking, the receptionist mentioned that the storage warehouse for goods was within the vicinity, and the other was right by the port. With that, Dilluk realized there were 2 warehouses. Not long after, Dilluk and Cindy parted ways with the receptionist. Once they were away from the guild, Cindy burst out in anger, scolding Dilluk for startling her like that. Dilluk apologized, explaining that he had no choice once he realized there were drugs hidden in the tea. Still confused, Cindy asked what he meant by drugs and making money. Dilluk explained it was a malicious business tactic, lacing food with drugs to create addicts, ensuring continued sales. He had read about a similar incident back when he was in the royal capital. Cindy was horrified by the idea that she might already be addicted without even knowing it. In response, Dilluk said they needed a plan. First, a drug analysis and treatment. Then, the dismantling of the Black Guild and the seizure of the drug smuggling ships. After that, the final step would be retrieving all the tea leaves that had already been distributed. Cindy wasn't surprised, as she had expected Dilluk to come up with a solid plan. With that, Dilluk suggested returning to the manor to inform Apollo and begin examining the tea leaves. A few days later, at the Lord's Manor in Rosas, everyone gathered as Dilluk arrived. Apollo apologized for making them wait and began reporting the results of the analysis. As Dilluk had suspected, the tea leaves contained a highly toxic drug. Coughing was confirmed to be a symptom of the poisoning. Taking the antidote would temporarily ease the symptoms, but the coughing would always return, creating an ongoing cycle. Apollo added that the coughing appeared to be an early-stage symptom. If someone stopped drinking the tea early enough, recovery was possible. Alice was relieved, mentioning that she had secretly warned Renee and the others to avoid the tea. Still, it seemed many people were already experiencing the symptoms. Dilluk suddenly thanked both Apollo and Alice, assuring them that once the situation was under control, he would initiate a large-scale retrieval of the tea leaves. At that moment, Apollo added one more detail. The tea leaves contained substances that didn't exist 4,000 years ago, meaning treatments were still incomplete. Nevertheless, she would continue analyzing the components further. Just then, Carrot turned to Cindy, asking if she had any new information to share. Cindy revealed that after their last encounter, She had returned to the guild disguised as a merchant. While there, she managed to obtain the license information of several underground guild members. When Carrot asked if it was alright to bring the list, Cindy reassured her that it was only a copy, made quickly using a new magical tool copier she had developed. Carrot looked over the list and noted that there were only about 20 names, fewer than she had expected. Bulk sighed, commenting on how easy it would be to deal with fools like them. However, Dilluk cautioned everyone. The number of people arriving through drug smuggling ships at the port was still unknown. Carrot was shocked to hear that the ships were also involved. Dilluk also added that they still had almost no information on the guildmaster. It was possible the master was hiding simply because they couldn't fight. It was not confirmed, but a possibility nonetheless. Dilluk then told the group that for the upcoming raid on the underground guild during the Harbor Festival, they should focus on deploying members with high combat ability. Hearing this, Cindy felt a bit disheartened, knowing she didn't have any combat power at all. Dilluk said he would share the full details of the plan once everything was finalized. With that, the group dispersed and went on with their day. Later, Cindy approached Dilluk to ask about their next strategy. She wondered if she was included among those with high combat abilities. Dilluk was caught off guard but gently told her that she had already contributed a lot through her infiltration work. Without her efforts, they wouldn't have obtained the roster. He didn't want to put her in unnecessary danger, and that means no, now, scram. Still, Cindy was disappointed. It became clear that she wouldn't be part of the next operation. She wanted to be more useful to Dilluk than anyone else, but just doing what she could no longer felt like enough. If she followed through, she would surely become the same girl she was 4,000 years ago. She insisted she was there because she wanted to change. Hearing this, Dilluk was stunned by her determination. Just then, Cindy revealed that she had a secret plan. She showed him her bracelet, one that looked similar to Dilluk's. When Dilluk asked if it was a magic stone replica, Cindy revealed that hers actually held the real thing. It was said to be a magic stone once worn by someone who sought refuge with Tenma. Since peace had returned to the forest and the stone was no longer needed, the dwarves had graciously offered it to Cindy. With that bracelet, Cindy believed she could unleash a powerful move. Huge objects, large quantities, complex substances, anything was possible now. Alchemy that had once been impossible could now be achieved. Dilluk was surprised, admitting he hadn't thought that far ahead. He then recalled how Carrot hadn't backed down in their battle against the manipulated demi-humans. He expected the same from Cindy and counted on her for the next mission. Cindy, caught off guard, smiled and promised to do her best. Dilluk then suggested finalizing the mission plan, and Cindy agreed to help. On the day of the mission, Dilluk and his companions gathered early near the Merchant Guild. Carrot informed him that she had memorized all the faces of the underground guild members, and Dilluk told her he was relying on her to capture them. Carrot said she'd manage, but she admitted she was worried for Dilluk and Cindy, who would be going after the guildmaster. However, Dilluk reassured her that he and Cindy would handle their part. Since the regular guild staff would be present, White Dragon's wide-range attacks could be safely used within the grounds. Meanwhile, Bulk and Red Tiger would assist in securing the transport ships. As for him and Cindy, their alchemy would give them quick mobility during battle. Originally, he had planned to confront the guildmaster alone, so having Cindy beside him was even better. Carrot had expected Dilluk to form a solid plan, and she had no objections. She also thought Cindy was dependable, and Cindy, full of energy, confirmed she was ready. Back in Rose's clinic, Apollo continued researching the treatment drug, working without sleep to finish it. Alice was also doing her part for the people, which motivated Cindy to push herself even harder. Carrot agreed with her and promised not to lose. Cindy was just as fired up, vowing to give it her all. Just then, Dilluk turned to them and said that once they passed through the forest, the guild would be just ahead. Before they moved, Dilluk reminded them to stick to the plan. Bulk and the others were already in place, set to infiltrate alongside the incoming cargo ship. He also warned that this was the enemy's stronghold, so they needed to stay alert. Hearing this, Carrot told Dilluk to watch his back too, and with that, the operation began. After gathering information through undercover investigations, Dilluk and his companions went undercover once again to monitor the arrival of drug smuggling ships. Inside the building, multiple groups had been stationed, while another team was positioned to keep watch for the ship's approach. Despite their small numbers, Dilluk believed that their elite force could infiltrate and swiftly suppress the guild. Their first objective was to lure and restrain the underground members within the building. After that, their target would be the guild leader. Once the restraints were secured, reinforcements would be called in. The next step involved seizing the incoming cargo ships and subduing their crew. Most importantly, they needed to keep the guild members and the ship personnel separated. Dilluk reminded the girls that the scale of the cargo ships and the guild leader's combat capabilities were still unknown, forcing them to split their own forces accordingly. Since the enemy's manpower would also be divided, They had to draw as many of the underground members into the building as possible. Finally, Dilluk, Carrot, and Cindy sprang into action, beginning with a direct assault on the front. There, the receptionist greeted Dilluk, clearly surprised that he had arrived so early for the import shipment. Without warning, Dilluk raised his sword, declaring his intent to dismantle the underground guild. He smiled as he apologized for the deception. The receptionist remained calm, saying he lived in a world where being deceived made Dilluk the villain. Then, without hesitation, he flipped the table and escaped. Cindy prepared to chase after him, but Dilluk told her to let him go. He wanted the man to sound the alarm and draw the guild members deeper into the building. With that, the three prepared to continue their infiltration. However, they suddenly halted when they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Just then, three men burst into the room, angrily calling them intruders. Carrot smirked, realizing that everything was going according to plan. She told Dilluk and Cindy to move on to the next phase while she stayed behind to handle the enemies. Carrot was confident she could handle the situation, recognizing the three men from the roster. Before leaving, Dilluk reminded her to take care of things. Just then, two ordinary guild members wandered into the scene, visibly confused by the commotion. One of them asked what was going on, and Carrot quickly explained that they were conducting maintenance on the building. She warned them it was dangerous and advised them to step back. With no questions asked, the clueless members left the area. The three men didn't fall for Carrot's bluff. They told her outright that her deception wouldn't work on them. Rumors had already spread from the front desk about intruders sneaking into the building. One of them smirked, confident that the commotion would draw reinforcements. But Carrot showed no fear. Instead, she said it was more convenient that they had shown up on their own. Just then, she revealed their mission to apprehend every single guild member before the drugs could be spread throughout the town. One of the men was stunned that Carrot knew about their plan. However, another remained confident, believing that a lone woman couldn't possibly do anything. At that moment, Carrot readied her weapon and dared them to lower their guard if they really believed that. One of the men was seemingly amused as he pointed his dagger at her, certain she was bluffing with her hammer. With a calm voice, she declared that there would be no escape from the trap she had laid. Suddenly, she slammed her hammer down onto the ground with a heavy thud. The men laughed, mocking her aim and brushing off her threats. In the next instant, beams of lasers snapped into view, and without warning, they activated. The men were caught in mid-laugh as electricity surged through their bodies. Screams echoed through the corridor as they collapsed, writhing in pain, muscles locking up from the shock. Just then, Carrot revealed that she had used invisible traps. The moment anyone came into contact with the light beams she had set up, they would be electrocuted. Though the power and range were still being fine-tuned, the pain was undeniable. Back then, Carrot knew that fighting in the forest without Cindy and Kororo had been dangerous. That was why she had to grow stronger, to protect everyone and become more useful. Now she felt that strength taking form. Her trap could even take down 15 more enemies. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the building, Cindy and Dilluk were pushing forward with their part of the mission. As they moved deeper, Cindy asked where the guildmaster might be hiding, but Dilluk had no idea. He thought it would be best to ask a guild member who knew the master's whereabouts. At that moment, Dilluk spotted one of the men he had previously made a deal with regarding the tea leaves. The man seemed wary of Dilluk's presence, but after a moment he recognized him as the merchant from the other day. Still, he quickly warned that the area was off limits. Dilluk didn't waste any time, and he demanded to know where the guildmaster was. The man was caught off guard, surprised that Dilluk was even interested in the guildmaster. Just then, he saw the determination in Dilluk's eyes and could tell he wasn't the type to back off just because someone refused to speak. Refusing to give up, Dilluk warned the man that he would force the answer out of him if he had to. The man said he would keep it simple and then, without warning, drew his sword. Before chaos could break out, Cindy stepped in to stop Dilluk. With a wink, she insisted on handling the situation herself. She activated one of her alchemic creations, trapping the man inside a cage. He began to panic, demanding to know what she was planning. Cindy didn't answer. Instead, she made the cage spin rapidly like a tornado and demanded to know the guildmaster's location. Poor man got turned into a fidget spinner. Dizzy and overwhelmed, the man finally confessed. The guildmaster was most likely on the second floor of the detached building, a place rarely visited. With that information, Cindy pushed Dilluk to move quickly. However, the man suddenly warned them that no matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be able to defeat the guildmaster. Cindy threatened to spin him again if he didn't stay quiet, and the man nervously begged her to stop. Meanwhile, Dilluk stayed cautious, the warning weighing heavily on his mind. He couldn't help but wonder, who exactly was the guildmaster? Before long, Dilluk and Cindy arrived at the detached building within the premises. As they scouted the area, Dilluk reminded Cindy to stay back if they encountered the guildmaster. He then approached a door and knocked, entering without waiting for a response. Inside, a shadowy figure stood in silence. Dilluk broke the tension, asking if the man before him was the guildmaster of the Roses Company. The figure replied, remarking that the guild was usually noisy, yet now he had an impolite guest standing before him. He claimed that the armor he wore was his formal attire and criticized Dilluk for entering without offering any contribution to the guild. Bro just dresses like a tank on the daily. Then, without warning, the guildmaster launched a punch. Caught off guard by the sudden attack, Dilluk quickly raised his sword to defend himself. But the strike was heavy, far heavier than anything that could be easily countered. Dilluk suddenly unleashed his fire magic through his sword, catching the guildmaster's attention. Impressed yet unfazed, the guildmaster remained confident that such an attack wouldn't work on him. In an instant, Dilluk's flames vanished, leaving him stunned. Cindy, alarmed by what she saw, called out to him. She explained that the magic stone embedded in the guildmaster's armor was absorbing his magic power. Still refusing to back down, Dilluk shifted tactics. He relied on his swordsmanship instead, launching a Ravello-style Moonshadow Slash. But the guildmaster stopped the blade with his bare hand, coldly declaring the attack worthless. Left with no other option, Dilluk was forced to retreat. The guildmaster questioned why Dilluk had even come, considering the weakness of his power. But Dilluk declared that he was the Lord of Tenma and Rosas, and that he had come to end the illegal drug trade and dismantle the Black Guild. The guildmaster scoffed. Unlike Akudu, Dilluk seemed to enjoy pretending to be a ruler. In his eyes, there was no real difference between the two. They were both incompetent. He told Dilluk to understand his place and recognize his own powerlessness. After all, he believed Rosas would one day be ruled by the successor of Eternal Darkness. Dilluk was confused by the remark until he remembered something Doratrin had said. There had been mention of the revival of the successor of Eternal Darkness. Suspicion grew within Dilluk, and he demanded to know what the guildmaster really was. But the guildmaster offered no explanation. Instead, he admitted to knowing Doratrin, calling him nothing more than a failed experiment. For someone who was given great power, ending up in a place as low as a pigsty was nothing short of disgraceful. Unlike Doratrin, the guildmaster claimed he was different. In that moment, Dilluk retaliated with a provocation of his own, asking if all the strength the guildmaster had shown so far came solely from his armor. Enraged, the guildmaster launched a punch in retaliation. However, before the blow could land, Cindy appeared and cast a barrier, halting the attack. The guildmaster was furious at their clever tactic while Dilluk gave a quick thanks to Cindy. Now he finally understood what he had to do: destroy the magic stone first. Without hesitation, Dilluk struck at the guildmaster's leg, making him writhe in pain. He then went for the face, managing to remove the guildmaster's mask. Dilluk was stunned at how easily it came off, thinking it had only been a glancing blow. In that moment, the guildmaster's true appearance was revealed. He was none other than a demi-human. A heavy silence followed until the guildmaster finally spoke. He asked if Dilluk was surprised to see his true nature. Dilluk was confused. Akudu, the man who had worked alongside the Black Guild, was infamous for his hatred of demi-humans. So why would someone like this be serving under him? The guildmaster only smirked, claiming that Akudu had simply never seen his true face. To him, it didn't matter whether someone was human or demi-human. What he despised most was being looked down on as incompetent. In his eyes, only the strong had the right to rise above. That was his justice. Bro can't be racist if he hates all races. Now he saw this as the perfect chance to defeat Dilluk and become Lord himself. However, Dilluk just smirked back, saying that the guildmaster's kind of thinking wasn't going to cut it. Still, behind his calm demeanor, Dilluk knew the situation was pretty bad. Any magic that made contact with the guildmaster would just be absorbed by his armor. Even with a purely defensive strategy, there weren't enough materials for alchemy. With no other choice, Dilluk readied his stance. There was only one path forward. He had to destroy the magic stone at all costs. Meanwhile, the guildmaster stood tall, proudly stating that Dilluk at least deserved credit for having the audacity to keep coming at him. As Dilluk lunged forward, he found the perfect opening to destroy the magic stone. However, the moment his sword made contact, it shattered instantly. Dilluk was too stunned to react, prompting a wicked smile to creep across the guildmaster's face. The impact sent Dilluk flying, and he hit the ground hard, writhing in pain. Cindy immediately rushed to his side without hesitation. Meanwhile, the guildmaster loomed over them, delivering a cold warning. Dilluk wouldn't be allowed to leave for free. Bros cooked. That is the end of the recap at chapter 24. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.